Welcome to the Provo Municipal Council work session. It is 12:40 on Tuesday, November 15th, 2016. We're gathered in the City Center Conference Room at 351 West Center in Provo, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. We will start with the roll call. Mr. Parker.
Wayne Parker.
George Stewart.
David Harding. Dave Knack. Dave Sewell.
Kim Santiago.
Janine Lease.
Gary Winterton.
Dave Andrew.
Brian Jones. Cliff Strachan.
Thank you. The opening prayer will be given by Karen Tapahi. She is our Council Community Relations Coordinator.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to be gathered this day and grateful for this beautiful city of Provo. We're grateful also for all the many people who work hard to keep Provo City running, and we ask that that would bless us and help us in our decisions this day. Please also bless our neighbors to the north and in Orem with the events of this day, that they may find peace. And we ask these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Tapahi. As most of you are probably aware, there was an incident at Mountain View High School, and several students were injured. So our thoughts go out to them and their family, students and their families at this time. Elizabeth Van Dorken is here. I just want to introduce her to you. She will be taking Louise Jorgensen's place in December. She's currently working in community development, and it's just our latest hire. So we welcome her and excited to get to work with you soon. So if you haven't had a chance to get to meet her, she'll be here, she'll be here on Monday, and Monday's her first day.
Yes.
So that'll be her first week. Today she's sort of shadowing, but Monday will be her first official day in the job. So we welcome her. We'll now look for a motion to approve the minutes of September 20th, 2016 work meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Winterton. And those in favor? The voting is unanimous and the affirmative. The first item of business is a presentation regarding diesel emission testing in Utah County. And this item will be introduced by Council Co-Chair Dave Sewell.
We'd like to welcome Ashley Soltesiak from Heal, Utah, to give us a presentation about diesel emission testing. I'll let her tell us a little bit about her organization. I just wanted to mention just real briefly that Mayor Curtis and I had a chance to hear this presentation at the last meeting of the Utah Valley Clean Air Task Force, and we really thought it was something worthwhile that we wanted you to hear. So thank you for coming down to.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Ashley Soltesiak, and I'm the Policy Director for HEAL. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about HEAL's background and what we do as an organization, just to get you familiar with us. Talk about the challenges that we face. Sorry, I can project if I need to, but this is helpful. Talk about some of the challenges that we face along the Wasatch Front here in terms of air quality, and then discuss diesel testing in Utah County. This is the only county right now that does not actually require emissions testing for diesel vehicles under 14,000 pounds. So we'll talk about the importance for air quality and a fairness issue that is also associated with that. As many of us drive gasoline-powered vehicles, it's sort of an expected cost, but I'll go into that. And then tell you a little update about what happened recently in Weber County in terms of their diesel emissions testing program. So HEAL Utah has been around for about 15 years. We actually began as Families Against Incinerator Risk out in the West Desert. We were sort of a loosely knit neighborhood toxics group that really focused on the challenges that the nuclear testing sort of posed to folks, and also incinerators out there. And so that was how we were formed. But really in the last 5 years, our organization has tended to focus much more on clean air. That's probably our largest campaign and the one that I manage. We also do focus on a transition to renewable energy and reducing our reliance on coal-fired power. But today I'm going to be talking about clean air. So this is sort of along the Wasatch Front here, and I think scope's important to think about, but this is not a statewide look at what our emissions are. This is here along the Wasatch Front. 48% of it comes from our vehicles. So that's an important area to target because it makes up the bulk of where our problem is. But 39% is area sources, and that's small businesses and our homes. Often we don't think about things like, yes.
And how much is from the generation of electricity?
So that's not really a big factor. So you might have like a natural gas power plant that's along the Wasatch Front, and that would be a major source. So that would go under the 13% here. But coal-fired power plants are quite a ways away, and so there are regional haze issues that are impacted. But no one's arguing that if you shut down a coal-fired power plant in Hunter or Huntington, that's going to impact air quality positively here along the Wasatch Front in any meaningful way. So yeah, the 39% is our building sector, and that's really going to become the biggest sector moving forward, and so certainly an area of focus. We don't really think about the fact that in our own homes, we have things like hot water heaters and furnaces that are running pretty constantly and generating a large amount of emissions. And so making our homes as efficient as possible is a big thing, because in the next 20 years, that sector will surpass vehicles. Vehicles are getting cleaner. We're going to hopefully see the transition to Tier 3 fuels and more electric vehicles on the road. So this paradigm is going to be shifting a bit. And then, as I said, 13% is heavy industry, and that includes those companies that emit over 100 tons per year of any criteria pollutants. So that's NOx, SOx, VOCs, all of those contributors that contribute to our PM 2.5 problem, which is a major problem. We're still out of attainment with our national ambient air quality standards. So this is a little background, and you may already be familiar with it, but just about the previous testing program that was in place here in Utah County. It started in '94, ended in 2006, and now we're the only county that has an inspection and maintenance program, but chooses to exempt diesel vehicles. And so this is a quote from a county commissioner, and saying that, the EPA said that there was no evidence to support it. We don't get a credit in it for our state implementation plan, and so we should do away with the program. And in some ways that did make sense. But after 2008, the technology has really changed a lot, and I think that's important to note. The software in those vehicles is much more advanced, and the testing is just as easy to do with a gasoline vehicle. And so it's sort of, as we've improved, there's really no reason not to include the testing of diesel vehicles after that year. Visual testing is required in all of the other counties that currently have an inspection and maintenance program, but we're not suggesting that everyone drive to Spanish Fork and use a really much more expensive technology. Just a visual testing requirement, making sure that people haven't just removed their catalytic converter or really manipulated the components of the vehicle in a way that is pretty obvious, actually. So these are just the reasons why we ought to test diesel vehicles, and they're using some of the local data that we've got here from Davis County. Light-duty vehicles were 8 to 9 times more likely to fail emission testing than their gasoline-powered counterparts. And so that's a big deal. If these vehicles tend to be less compliant, that's certainly a problem. Also, 6% of new diesels are failing in Salt Lake County, and that's somewhat surprising, but given what we've heard with Volkswagen and some of these other companies, the first go-around that they're testing these vehicles, 6% are failing. So that's pretty interesting anecdotal information, at least. And then the total PM 2.5 from a failing diesel is quadruple the amount of a compliant gasoline-powered vehicle, 7 to 8 times that of another diesel. Of an average gasoline vehicle. I switched those two. But I will caution that this study was relatively limited to a small number of vehicles, and so it's certainly an area for future study. This talks about the health impacts, and there are many. It is harmful in both short-term and long-term periods. So diesel particulates, if you're hanging out behind the tailpipe of one, you might get a headache or dizzy, you might get a cough, that kind of thing. But if you are a person that suffers from asthma or has a lung issue, then this is going to really be a much more serious problem for you. And prolonged exposure to these diesel particulates is actually really dangerous. I mean, this is where we really start to see the seriousness of it, that it can cause, cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary, respiratory disease, lung cancer. And so even the International Agency for Cancer Research identified it as a known human carcinogen in 2012. And so it's absolutely a particulate of concern that really does impact human health. And there are numbers of studies to show that. So the fairness issue always comes up in these debates, and certainly was a big part of the discussion that happened in Weber. But essentially, as I drive a gasoline powered vehicle, unfortunately I don't have a Prius yet, but I anticipate that the cost is $30 per year for an emissions test, and I accept that as the sort of embedded cost in driving that vehicle. It's sort of an unfair exemption that people who choose to drive a diesel vehicle are exempted from paying that cost when we all need to do our part to contribute to cleaning up our airshed. We have major problems, and everyone needs to chip in. And so the beauty of this is it really only requires a simple software upgrade. So you just have to upgrade the OBD testing, and no new infrastructure would be required. And so I think that's an important part, that there's no cost to the county, no cost to the taxpayers, simply that $30 fee that gasoline drivers are already paying. So the debate was pretty contentious in Weber County for a while, and then they unanimously decided to pass it after all the evidence was looked at. And I think that speaks volumes in itself, that there was a lot of misinformation floating around. But there, at least, they had 13% of registered vehicles were diesels. Yes.
Is that 13% light vehicles, or are we throwing in the whole diesel?
No, so
population?
it's light to medium duty, so it's anything under 14,000.
So
Yeah.
that statistic is 14,000.
Yes. So yeah, heavy duty is a whole different ballgame, and then you start impacting different industries, agriculture, and so the thought was to sort of exclude those sectors and limit it to just more passenger vehicles. But they were reported for nearly 50% of their on-road NOx emissions, which is a huge number, and so that definitely contributes to our inversions. NOx is like I said, one of those criteria pollutants that we really care about limiting emissions from. And so need to update this, it's a couple months ago now, but the Weber Morgan Board of Health voted unanimously to include the testing of diesel vehicles in their IM program. And so that's the link if you want to check out what they did. I actually brought a handful of copies of it because I think it outlines a really good sort of basic plan. Davis County is a little bit of an exception because they actually have a much more stringent testing program than any of the other counties. But Salt Lake, Cache, and Weber are all sort of doing about the same thing. So if you want to see a copy of that, I have them. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
What's the attitude of our current county commissioners, and have you talked to the newest one, Nathan Ivy?
So I've reached out to him. I haven't actually spoken with him, but my understanding was that the county commission was not entirely supportive of this idea, and I think perhaps that's because they don't realize the shift in technology that happened around 2008. So hopeful that attitude can change. Yes.
There's a guy I see driving around in a big truck, and it seems that, I don't know if is there the ability for some of these drivers to flip a switch and just turn on the black smoke?
Yes. So it's a whole wonderful new thing that I get to deal with. It's dubbed rolling coal, and basically what they do is they sell these little tuners that you can put into your vehicle and modify it so that literally with the flip of the switch you can roll coal on someone and just put out a huge plume of black smoke. And yeah, it's certainly a problem, and actually some of those tuners would be able to get around an emissions testing program, but just having a testing program in place would be the start of discouraging people that modify their vehicles in that way. Yes.
Joe Thomas with the DEQ says that's really not possible anymore with the latest vehicles. Since 2008, it's much more difficult to tamper with them. If you do tamper with them, what's the warranty?
It's true. Well, the older vehicles tend to be the ones that are modified more, definitely. But you know, as one technology gets better, so does the other, and they kind of work in tandem, unfortunately. So they are available for the newer technology, but it's certainly a much bigger problem with the older trucks. Yes.
13% up north, can you give a statistic, what Utah County, what percentage of the vehicles?
So on that fact sheet, we've got the number of vehicles, and I've been working with legislative research and general counsel and the DMV to try to get the total number for the state so that we could talk about it in terms of percentages for this meeting. It's over 20,000 registered diesels in this county. And I think you've got that on your fact sheet, Don, right?
It's on the draft resolution.
Yeah, so we know the number of vehicles, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, the DMV is really struggling to get us those numbers back.
Do we know how many of those are pre-2008 that would have the harder emissions challenge?
No, I don't have that information for you.
And do we know, have the county commissioners, I know the question is asked what's their attitude, but if we got any information on their argument about not doing it, has that been a presentation that has been given, or are we going to hear, or?
I asked, and they said it because it didn't help.
Didn't help our air pollution?
It didn't define what didn't help means, so I don't know, but they just said it doesn't make a difference.
And I think perhaps that attitude comes because it's not required by the EPA. Because, for example, only 1% of vehicles nationwide are diesel vehicles. We have a lot higher number of diesels here along the Wasatch Front than the average, of America.
So along those lines, it could have been one of two things, and I should have asked more questions, but I didn't. One is, we get credit for testing gasoline engines, but we don't get credit for testing the diesel. So it may have been a reference to what doesn't help that formula. So why do it? Or it may have been it doesn't help the air, so why do it?
But the reality is that, if you are catching even, whatever number of vehicles, if you are taking non-compliant vehicles off the road, and data shows that these vehicles do tend to be more non-compliant than their gasoline counterparts, that's going to have a positive impact on air quality. It seems simple, but yes.
In the, so we're kind of saying there's a difference between pre-2008 vehicles and post-2008 vehicles. What is envisioned, I know we're not necessarily getting into the details, but what is envisioned, how the newer ones could be tested just by plugging into the car's computer?
Right.
Would the pre-2008 vehicles also need to be inspected? Would that be just a visual inspection, or what? Would they also be $30, or would it be more for the owners of pre-2008 vehicles?
So it would be the same price, and it would be just a visual inspection. I can actually, if you want to see way more detail than you probably do, I can give you a copy of what Weber County passed. And so that outlines, specifically what they're looking at on those vehicles, but it's not requiring them to go, completely blanking on the name of that technology, but it's the one that they have up in Spanish Fork that is quite a bit more expensive. So that's not what we're talking about here.
With the technology, we pull into half a dozen gas stations or a dozen gas stations to do this. What kind of things are need to be purchased by testing stations? There's only one in Spanish Fork now. What you plug in? You say anybody can do it?
Well, so for any existing emissions testing station, it's just a software upgrade that's required. It's not any new infrastructure. It's just, the way that the software works, it should be a free upgrade for that facility. Yes.
So if they're saying it doesn't help, it must be on that formula, because we could argue that we shouldn't bother testing new cars till they're 5 years old or something, because that wouldn't help air quality either. But if it's based on a federal formula, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. And I haven't talked to the commissioner, so I'm not sure which path, they're going down. But I think regardless of the credits toward our state implementation plan for PM 2.5, this would have a tangible impact that is positive on air quality in this county. Yes.
In the draft joint resolution, the third whereas is, whereas the 20,266 diesel vehicles registered in Utah County, are those only the medium to light duty?
Yes.
Okay. And do we need to, would it be helpful to specify on that draft that these are the medium to light duty diesel vehicles?
Yes.
I believe it says under 14,000 pounds. Well,
No.
maybe I saw it.
failed to put that in.
Oh, okay.
It does down at the bottom, but not at the top.
Okay.
I would recommend, we also add, in the, down on the now therefore, that we should include testing for vehicles under 14,000 pounds, May 2008 or later, and visual inspection for older vehicles.
Right, and they cut it off at 97 in Weber County. Let me just actually grab that form and I can pass it out to you guys. Question, we have 10 copies. No idea that somebody put some show to hear me answer questions of vehicles. But I also apologize because we have had some weird printer issues today. But I can pass these out to as many folks as would like. Pardon? Oh, sure, yeah, there's not enough of them, but it does, I can, read it a million times. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the new requirements for Weber County look like. Yeah, it's definitely a positive improvement.
So if there's no other questions, I think what we would be looking for is a motion to put this on the December 6th meeting for a vote on a resolution like this, and then we would refer this draft resolution to administration, to council staff, and to council members for any feedback you might have between now and then.
Great, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'm certainly, be happy to send you electronic copies and stuff too. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Solstiak? Sorry, say your name. It's Solstiak. It's ridiculously close. Okay. Oh, I get it. I don't know what it's spelled. So nothing like Solstiak. Okay, so are there any further questions?
I'm not in favor of moving forward. And I feel like I have a good enough relationship with my county commissioners, I know personally, and my legislators, I will visit with them personally about the issue of why they are or not in the joint resolution that I'm not sure that I support. I'd like to hear the understanding of the issue. Maybe we should hear from the county commissioners before we tell them what we'd like them to do.
I'm in favor of the testing, but I think we should seriously consider what Mr. Stewart is suggesting. Maybe reach out and I don't have such a personal relationship with our county commissioners, but if we reach out to them, I don't know if individually or formally as a group, ask for their take on it. And if we get to an impasse, maybe we do push forward and do a joint resolution. But if this could be resolved in another way, that may be more, try other avenues before resolving this.
Considering how we kind of made a decision and then went backwards on solar, I think we're going to do the same thing here. So I would say that we ought to reach out to our county commissioners, try to at least understand what we're doing before we go. The flag out.
as pointed out, I don't think this is just a county commissioner issue. It's a state, also a state legislative issue as well.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, it could be done on a county level or it could be done on a state level.
The other counties are already participating. We're the only county that's not, correct? So I'd be happy to reach out to our commissioners with Mr. Stewart. If you wanted to meet with them and talk to them individually and see where they're at, we can come back and report to the council on what their response is. Nathan Ivey and Bill Lee and Greg Graves. So,
It might be helpful to go a little broader with the county commissioners and ask overall what their clean air approach is and their philosophy is. We were unsuccessful in getting the county commission and the other mayors, quite frankly, to support our clean air pledge, which was non-legislative. And so I think it would be good to know just a broader, what are their thoughts on clean air, what are their aspirations and ideas themselves.
okay. Mr. Hardy?
I just want to be very clear that I am very supportive of testing for diesel vehicles. I think I feel very strongly that we should be doing it, and so I'm hopeful that this dialogue will help reach that conclusion and reach that solution.
Who advises the county commission on these issues? Is it the same groups that we are hearing from, or how are they getting their information?
I can't answer that, Don. I don't know if you.
The health department advises them, and they, Greg Graves occasionally attends our Utah Valley Clean Air Task Force. I think, and they were asked by the health department how they felt about diesel testing. It was very clear they are not aware of the changes since 2008. They were aware of the ridiculous nature of diesel testing in 2006, not aware of the changes in 2008.
I'm just being a disconnect somewhere, and I'm not sure where, why we're not.
They used to have an official county clean air task force, and I believe that Dave Graves was on that at one time, right? But then that sort of fell away, and then the Chamber of Commerce started the clean air task force, and we work with them. But we have no organic connection with the county commission. They occasionally hear rumblings from us, but it could be better. And of course, the health department doesn't advise them. I don't think they're up to speed on the diesel technology.
Mr. Connect?
So we meet on a regular basis with the school board, and Forum City. When do we meet with? When's the last time we met with county commissioners?
Good idea. Mr. Jones?
I was just going to say, looking at the way that legislative bodies interact with each other, think about the fact some of the questions seem to be assuming that the county commission has carefully considered this issue and intentionally rejected it, and now you're being asked to try to get them to reverse that. It's entirely possible, as often happens with legislative bodies, that in fact they just have not considered it. And that the reason why you're being asked to consider a resolution is that you're being asked to consider a resolution that would invite them to consider something they haven't considered yet. So I just throw that out there as for context, as far as, which is not to say that you need to pass the resolution, but as something to think about with regard to the questions that have been asked. I don't think we've heard anything in this meeting that indicates that the county commission has even heard this presentation or thought about it, which is the same thing that happens all the time when things are brought before you that you haven't previously considered.
Which is a good reason not to go ahead, because we don't know what if they consider it or not. It'd be nice to know that before we go ahead with it, in my mind at least. Also, my state legislators who represent me, I'd like to know what they feel about it.
Understood.
Mr. Sol?
So did I hear?
Go ahead, Mom, I've heard just.
Okay. I would just say, I've personally reached out to the county commissioners, have not been successful in actually speaking with them about this issue, but I'd be more than happy to share any information with them. And as in terms of the local representatives, I believe that Senator Brandel is willing to be a co-sponsor on the bill that Representative Aaron is going to run, depending on how this goes. So my understanding is that he's generally supportive, but.
Mr. Swalter? I just wanted to mention that I have reached out to Nathan Ivy by email, and he did not seem to be familiar with the issue. He indicated to me that he would study it and get back with me, so I'm waiting on that. I did speak with Bill Lee just a few days ago for a few minutes. Didn't have a real in-depth conversation on that with him. I plan to continue that conversation. I did get a phone call from someone from the Mountain Land Association of Governments. I hesitate to say too much about that other than the opinion expressed there was the only reason we're even doing any testing at all is to get the EPA credits, and if we weren't getting that, we wouldn't even be testing gasoline vehicles. I frankly didn't understand the argument very well. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. So.
I could maybe add one more comment to Brian's too, and that another purpose of this is, and I haven't talked to Senator Bramble about this, so I don't want to infer that I have, but frequently he's looking for support or for somebody to back him up or for somebody so he doesn't feel so lonely when he's up there proposing something like that. And I think one of the ways I view this is simply as that, is giving them a tool that they can go and say, look, I'm representing Provo in pushing this thing forward. And that it's very helpful to a legislator up there on the Hill to be able to say, I've got my city behind me.
Mr. Harding?
Because the legislative session is coming, I think whatever we do we need to have a resolution before that begins, which I believe is first week of January. So it's not on December 6th. Maybe we need to have it. Do we have another meeting?
The legislative session usually starts, they start their committee meetings beforehand, but the actual legislative session starts on the first Monday following President's Day, Martin Luther King Day.
So we might be able to hear it, we might be able to hear this first session in January, start first meeting in January. Anyway, I think we should be very sensitive to that, but I assume that if Utah County chooses to test diesel, then there would be no need for a state measure. So anyway, I do think time is of the essence, and so for those that are reaching out, thank you, by the way, for reaching out. Appreciate that. But let's see if we can surround this quickly. I'm willing to delay this now, but I won't be willing to delay it much more.
I'll call Commissioner meeting tomorrow.
Getting back to us meeting with them or them meeting with us. I don't know when they meet. I mean, December 6th is the last time we're meeting this year, but I don't know what their schedule's like and whether they would like to schedule us to come visit them or whether we want them to come visit us. But I think a joint meeting would be nice to talk about this and other issues and just kind of set a precedent that we meet with them on some kind of regular basis.
I agree. I think it's a good idea to meet with them yearly like we do with the legislators. So I think that's a great idea to add that to our list of lunches even, and make sure that we meet with them regularly as well. I think that's important. So I guess we don't really need a motion to reach out to our county commissioners, but we could come back we'll just get back to the council as soon as we know something. I think it would be helpful to have, I'm gonna take one more shot at your name, Ms. Souls,
Sotishak.
Sotishak, to maybe either have you by conference call or have you as, they call it a lifeline, call a friend. Just in case there are questions that we have that we'd like to run by you.
Absolutely.
I don't know you're in Salt Lake or where you're at.
I am based in Salt Lake, but I'd be happy to open in or show.
Okay, I think that could be helpful in case there are questions that we're not certain about. That would be good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Sewell, for bringing this to council attention. The next item is the discussion regarding the use of concept plans for general plan amendments and rezoning applications in the context of the development review process. This item will be presented by Gary McGinn, our Community Development Director. Or it's like, okay.
Slightly more hair, not much more. I think the purpose of this primarily is to help you understand the current process that we're going through. And Mr. Sewell has his the Development Review Committee that they're working on a number of items. Staff in community development has, as part of the Provo 360 project, we identified a couple holes in our current process and ways that we could help facilitate maybe a more streamlined development review process. And so we've started looking at that kind of on the same timeline as the Development Review Committee, but trying to be careful not to override any of the good work that they're doing. But in essence, what occurs right now is with any kind of a general plan or an annexation or a rezone, our current city ordinances require a preliminary project plan or a preliminary subdivision. And that decision is basically just determined on what the rezone process is. Obviously if it's a single family detached residential neighborhood, there's a subdivision involved there. When you're rezoning to a commercial property, there's project plans. So that's really the only distinction between those two titles. Right now, the ordinance requirements are fairly robust in the amount of information that a developer has to produce in order for them to request to have a rezone or an annexation or a general plan amendment heard. Some of those documents can be fairly expensive, in the tens of thousands of dollars as far as engineering and things involved. And so we've been looking at ways that we can simplify what we've really seen as the critical items that you would want to consider and that we see as common issues or concerns from the residential areas, neighboring areas, when they're discussing an item. Items that things that they want to know about to kind of ease whether or not a zone should be applied. So this isn't any of kind of a discussion about the final documenting stage. Those are obviously full-on construction documents that are reviewed at the staff level for compliance to the zone. Nothing necessarily there would change, but we looked at a couple different ways that we could help facilitate this. The big keys that we've seen with these are, with rezone requests, are a conceptual site plan, understanding a general layout of how things will be put together, circulation patterns within that, elevations, what the building is going to look like, and utility information, understanding that you can actually service the facility. This proposal suggests that the utility information would be a little bit more preliminary, which does lend itself to having to have some flexibility and later on down the road and making sure that that actually works out, but at least a level of detail that verifies that yes, that could be serviced would obviously be there. And that subdivisions would go to just a state code minimum. We require significantly more information for preliminary subdivisions right now than the state code minimum does. And I think your next item on the agenda is actually one of the attempts of providing some of those smaller subdivisions an easier path as well. But I don't want to get too involved in that. I want to give Chad an opportunity to expel his expertise upon you. But this proposal would basically, in essence, it would move from doing preliminary project plans to a concept level plan. Like I said, those key items that we've seen that are really the critical items that people want to know before a zone's applied or not, and maybe some of that back end stuff that a developer's having to produce and spend a lot of money on is not something that's necessarily provided with the rezone request, but provided after they have a decision.
That's also the same information that typically goes into a development agreement. So the things that you want to see and you like to have included in a development agreement, that is part of what would be submitted for conceptual review.
Right, so yeah, that's a good point. So that wouldn't necessarily preclude any of some of that same information that you're still using right now for those development agreements. It would be as part of that, which is what that's suggesting. And then obviously, again, after that process, it would move there. As we've been discussing this, the idea has been thrown out about potentially adding another step and doing a concept level and still a preliminary level and a final level that would fit into the process workflow this way. In essence, it would require basically what I just mentioned in the previous proposal, but then there'd be a two-step process after that of some partial construction documents that are reviewed and then final construction documents. But these are the two ideas that have been floated around so far. We're looking for council direction on maybe where we should go from here. So,
Which one does the department prefer?
which department? I honestly, I don't know that there's any major fight going on in any way. We're just here looking for preliminary thoughts, ideas that you have as the council.
Public Works, what do you prefer?
I think we have some reservation about going directly from a concept plan to a final plan. Concept in our minds, like we think that that's a great thing to do as far as not requiring as much information, for someone to have to invest time and money in before they know, yes, this conceptually seems to be what the city is willing to approve, without having to go into all of the geotechnical and the project design, which basically they're having to do at a preliminary level right now. So I think if we had our preference, we'd probably say, let's get something conceptually that could get us to a good place to move forward with, like a rezone or a general plan amendment. But then before we approve, say a subdivision at a preliminary level of the planning commission, let's get into more of the meat and the details of that. The final plans, I think, are all right now pretty much being done administratively. And so it wouldn't require them to go back through another public process. It would simply be administrative approval.
Mr. Connect.
So I like this layout because I think it actually adds a level of protection. If we're trying to prevent people from wasting money, gambling, well, the concept plan is a policy decision of, is this the right thing? But the preliminary, after the rezone hearing, going through a preliminary plan analysis to see, as it says there, is the proposed layout serviceable? And it could fail. If it couldn't be serviced properly, then there's really no point in going on and spending the final dollars. So it keeps them from, I think, wasting the effort of assuming that, oh yeah, we got to go ahead and we're just gonna spend all the money. So it's incremental, and you may spend some money and find out, whoops, it's not gonna work. Is that possible, that engineering wise it would fail?
Yeah, I think in a conceptual plan level, I think that, you know, that in public works view, that we would see, we could look at those major, you know, deal killer type issues in that concept approval process, you know, we just don't have the ability to search utilities or some of those kinds of things. But then as we move farther into the detail of that, it becomes more of a cost-related issue of, are the developers willing to expend the expenses that it would take to do what's necessary to move to that next level?
Doesn't that move away from what we were originally trying to do, which was make it more predictable from the beginning for developers? So if there were going to be, major expenses or things that it wasn't coming in the later stages where it's a little more predictable up front in the beginning.
I think they would obviously be doing their homework along the way. I think they would have an idea of what those costs are at that concept. It just would not have them having to expend design expenses, in addition to the project costs.
Mr. Harding?
I think probably one of the biggest variables is what is the council going to say? I mean, they can say, well, we think that this is where the sewer line is. They know what the risk is that the sewer line may not be there. But one of the harder things I think to predict is how is the council going to vote. So this moves the council decision up sooner so they can spend less money before kind of that biggest question mark is resolved. And we've had this conversation, we've been working on this conversation for a while, and I know I've said this before, but I just want to throw it out again. My discomfort with this, and I'd like to find a way forward that kind of addresses this, but I think one of my concerns is I like to think concrete. So let's use an example that I've used before. And again, I'm not hung up on this, but I want to see whatever process we put into place is something that would address this. But we had not far from my house on 5th West and 8th North, a great proposal that came in. It was a medical office, small clinic. That was going to have just regular office hours. It was going to be quiet and at night and not disturb the neighbors around it. The neighbors supported it. The council approved the zone change. It then changed hands, and a gas station was built 24/7. Smells, sights, sounds, all the things that the neighborhood didn't want that they got after the zone was changed. And so, however we do this, I want some way to address. I mean, particularly if we're just going with concept plans. I mean, at one extreme, that's Googling online. Well, that's roughly kind of looks like what I want to build. Drop in some pictures off of Google, and okay, here's my concept plan, and I'm going to have put the prettiest face on it because it's just a concept plan. And if they get the zone changed, now everything that's available under that zone is now open to them. And so, if we're considering zone changes without development agreements or without other protections, not only should we be looking at that prettiest picture that someone can find that says, oh yeah, I'd like to do something like this, the prettiest picture, we should be looking at the worst case picture as well. And the neighborhood should also I almost think that the neighborhood should be presented with, well, if this zone change goes through, here's your nightmare that could happen as well. Or we need to do, or there needs to be some other protections. So I'm a little bit afraid. One of the protections is going through that preliminary plan made it, it had to invest in some of that. And so there's a little more skin in the game. So it's a little bit harder just to veer off. Where if it's a concept plan, what stops them from sticking a pretty picture up there that they may or may not actually be committed to? So that's where my discomfort is, and I hope we can find something that allows us to get the benefits of this without, we talk about control and flexibility, and without some careful balancing here, this is the council giving up a lot of control and a lot of ability to protect our residents if we don't have some other things in there.
Mr. Connect?
Well, you bring up great points, and we hear time and time again that the neighborhood was promised one thing and got another. And when somebody puts up the pretty picture and makes the promises that we're going to do this and we're going to do that, it's called a development agreement. If you don't get it in writing, it is not going to happen. So that's what's missing here in the flow chart is if somebody wants to say, this is my concept, where's the development agreement to say he's really going to do it?
It actually does say that second line of the second step. It does say development agreement. At times we've been trying to kind of go away from those, and there's reasons to go away from it. I don't think a development agreement is the perfect solution. Maybe it is a sufficient solution, but just as we're discussing this, I just want to make sure that we're weighing all of this and then understanding potential unintended consequences. But development agreements is something that has been used in the past, and that's the kind of thing that may make this a workable solution for me.
Mr. Stewart?
Is that a development agreement? What do we have? We have what you have in the service station, right?
Or we have zoning, and that's been another thing that's been stated is we have development agreements. One argument, I'm not saying I agree with it fully, but one argument has been we rely on development agreements because we don't trust our zoning. And I'd say yes, because I think maybe our zoning is so broad that we don't feel like, hey, we can rezone this and we know that we're going to get.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. So I don't know how you could go up with this concept without a development agreement.
Or fixing our zoning.
That's really more
Agreed.
difficult long term.
Agreed.
Not
But until
everything.
we fix the zoning, we have to do something, and to give up the control that would be given up with this worries me. As it does you, David.
And not everything really falls within zoning. I'm thinking of the dikes and Osprey Point development. You know, I don't know if that's part of zoning, but it wasn't part of the development agreements. Now there's questions whether they stay or go. And so I think there's a place for development agreements, and you're right, there was no agreement, so we don't, you know, how do you hold them to keeping those dikes in place if they don't want to? So I think there are some things to consider there too. Mr. Van Buren?
So let's follow this process. When does the zone get changed and a developer would know that he has a zone change?
The zone determination
Zone
would
hearing?
be here, yes, in either of the scenarios.
Based on concepts, right?
Yeah, right now, the development agreement is not required for every zone change, for every concept, or every development.
Well, it can be. That's more of a determination.
Is that kind of one of the issues that we've got? Let's just do okay, so there's a piece of ground, zoned R110 right now. It's kind of a hard piece of ground. You know, this is a real one, but we're just looking at it outside. To make that piece of ground work for housing, a zone change is probably required for an R8 or an R6. But until a developer knows he's going to get that zone change, he's not going to go spend the money with the people to buy the property or to offer a price. He can talk to him, but he doesn't know where that price point is, because all of a sudden now and it's a small piece, so it might be a difference between 3 lots and 6 lots. But that's it'll either work or it won't. You know, you have 3 more lots, all of a sudden it's a deal that'll work. Only 3 lots, it won't work. And so it seems like we've got to give them enough to get to that point to know they've got a zone change, but then there has to be some kind of control, because okay, you get the zone change, then all of a sudden the plan that person A started with might be little cottages, kind of pocket neighborhood thing. Now it's our R16, it could be a whole different, somebody come in with a whole different thing. It's not near as attractive, it doesn't work. And so where's that control?
Yeah, I think one thing that's works for the developer and works for us is that the more you require the developer to spend before he knows that rezoning, the less flexible he is. You've required him to spend $50,000 in engineering. When staff comes in and says, you know, we could get behind this project if you change this and move that and shift that, he's already blowing $50,000 in engineering, doesn't have to re-spend that again. So to me, it's in both of our interests if we can get to the same place. And I think engineering and planning are both saying the same thing on this. We get that same place and the same assurances, the same level of comfort, without having to make them spend so much money just helps us out.
So I had a question. There were a couple of comments about this process involving us, the council giving up control, or some amount of control. And can you help me understand that? Because it looks to me like the process is about the same, except that the developer is spending less money up front before we get to the rezone. So what's different about this that would involve giving up control?
Okay. So what we hear is a developer comes in and because of the neighborhood or because the council's having a bad day, they get turned down, or maybe someone else was approved. It can be fickle, and they spend a lot of money, and it's just a crapshoot. So with the concept plan, you know, as long as there's people making decisions, there's always the possibility that this one is approved and that one's not approved, I suppose. But we want to keep the amount of money and effort that they spend to get the critical answer from the council to a minimum. And then after that, they just have to jump through the hoops, which hopefully everyone's done their homework so that it doesn't crash and burn because of some infrastructure problem.
But David, wasn't the intention anywhere through this to give up any control? That wasn't the intention.
With the issue of rezoning, once a rezone goes on the ground, the developer can do anything within that rezone. And that's the Chevron example. And you could have required a final project plan with final construction drawings, and they still could have changed to the Chevron. That's not really what keeps them. If the council's concerned about a worst case scenario, typically the council has said, we're concerned because we're going to rezone, and then you can do anything, and we're not comfortable with this. And then
worst case scenario.
Yeah, because we're not comfortable with the worst case scenario. And then frequently the developer will say, well, okay, I understand that. To alleviate your fears, I will proffer a development agreement and agree to build what I'm telling you I will build. That's really outside of the process that we're talking here. Our ordinance process requires the preliminary plan for the rezone. And to reduce the cost, we're just saying, how about a concept plan? Because the preliminary plan, they turn in this much material, the council will see that much. Because you're not seeing a lot of the preliminary utility drawings and things like that. Now, if they had a concept and got the rezone, they still have to comply with our code. And if there's a engineering issue that they can't work around, there's an infrastructure issue that they can't work around, that could still kill their project, even though they have a rezone.
Mr. Hardy?
So to answer the question, I agree that the current process doesn't guarantee it. This process, this change doesn't guarantee it. So from that perspective, it's not making things easier for those worst case scenarios to be realized. But the same, and I'm not opposed to this, I just want to make sure that we're understanding. The same reason why now they're less willing to work with community development to turn the orientation a little bit or make these changes is because they've already spent $50,000 on it, for example. And for the same reason, if they've already spent $50,000 on developing these these preliminary plans, now they're that much invested in that project, and so it's a little bit harder just to like throw it away and do something completely different that's allowed in the zone. At least they've again put a little skin in the game, and so So there's negative consequences, they're less flexible to address concerns, but the benefit is they're already down the track a ways on what they were showing to the neighborhood, what they were showing to the council. If we can get that, if we can make it easier without lessening the control or lessening the likelihood that we're going to get what they're presenting, I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
But Chevron, when they came in with the office building, and they got their rezone, they had a preliminary plan for an office building.
Right. And again, there's no guarantee, but there's a little momentum there at least, and it doesn't mean that it can't change, but we would be giving up some of that momentum. And if we can fix it in another way, and maybe it's as simple as changing the way that changing the process so that when it goes to the neighborhood, there is an advocate on the other side that's saying, oh, by the way, while they're presenting these nice pictures, by the way, this would also be acceptable with this zone, so that the neighbors know enough to say, oh, well, we like what you're presenting, we don't like what this other thing, and so now they're thinking up front about what they might need to profit. Because the way the process is now, the neighborhood's shown a pretty picture. How many times do we get to us a different project than what the neighborhood voted on, but still, goes to the planning commission, they're told, well, the neighborhood voted unanimously for this, but it's not really for that, it's changed. And now we don't know what the neighbors' concerns would be for those worst case scenarios, so we don't know. It's just, anyway, so that's where my concern is. I generally support this. I just know that we're giving up some of that momentum that would encourage them to finish what they're presenting. And so I think we need to augment our process some other way to make up for that.
Mr. Stewart? As I get older, things need to become more simple. Development agreements, it sounds like the only answer to get what you are promised is a development agreement. It seems like to me. What are the other answer?
Mr. Knight?
Well, I would agree. When promises are made, promises should be kept, whether it's the city or developers. And there needs to be a mechanism. There could be circumstances when instead of the amusement park, they're actually advocating the sausage factory, which is the lowest common denominator. And we don't need a development agreement because anything better than that would be great.
So if they come in and want to make presentations and promises, we need to say, okay,
Sounds like you need a development agreement.
but there may be times when it's not necessary, and the essence of a development agreement is they're willingly proffering things. Therefore, I don't know that we can actually require a development agreement or require them to proffer anything different and unique. But if they are proffering things that are different and unique in order to wow the neighborhood or us, they better put it in writing.
I'll rely on you to know the difference. Okay, is that okay?
The only other thing I wanted to mention, when we're talking about reducing costs for developers, at least for them to get their decisions made, one thing that doesn't necessarily show up, but still is a cost, is the time involved as well. So as we try to simplify the process, that's a lot of what we want to try to do, is shorten the amount of time before they actually get the decision for entitlement on their property. So just be aware that's one of the things that we're hoping to look at.
So Mr. Regan says that this is the amount that the developers require, this is the amount that the council actually sees. We'll still be seeing this amount or not seeing this amount?
In either of these proposals, you still, what we're narrowing down their submittal requirements to is the amount that you see in the end anyway.
Mm-hmm. So we're getting what we would normally see anyway.
Yes.
With this process.
If I can add one comment from the public works perspective, I've worked for cities that have this kind of a concept preliminary final approach, and it definitely increases the development agreement requirements. Nearly every multifamily, nearly every commercial has development agreements with them. Single family tend not to. But I think what the concept plan helps is to eliminate some basic questions. Is the council, is the planning commission, and is the staff supportive of a development in concept? And if the answer is no, and I can give you a number of examples. Scott's Corner out on the west side, it was a very difficult concept. We probably could have said from the get-go, without going into a lot of expense for easements and storm drain calculations, all that stuff, we probably could have told you right off the bat, hey, this is going to be a tough one for the development to move forward from a public works standpoint. Student housing, if it doesn't fit in for the neighborhood, the council's not going to support it. Those basic questions need to be answered right off the bat. And that's what a concept plan gives, is about 3 or 4 basic questions. And then you go into preliminary, and then that's when you start to do the more expensive geotechnical work and the engineering work starts to come in. But generally, if they can get through those first 3 or 4 questions and they get yeses on, that's when they start to be willing to expend the money. I don't know if that helps with.
So is there enough interest in this and moving it forward to a council meeting?
Which one?
Or-
Concept 1 or concept 2?
And
If there is interest, I think what would help us is if there's interest on the council and which one, to let us know, and then community development and public works will work together, draft up some changes to ordinance language, take it to the planning commission, because this would be an amendment to Title 14 and some areas of Title 15, and then go to planning commission and then come back to the council.
Mr. Slow?
Could you just summarize real briefly the trade-offs as you see them between the two?
Between 1 and 2?
Between proposal 1 and proposal 2?
Sure. The main difference between the two is basically just an added step after the rezone. So the level of detail that, level of detail that you would see is exactly the same in either scenario. Once a developer is given a decision on their rezone, if that's granted in favor of them, under this scenario, they would move to basically just producing full construction documents that meet the ordinance requirements and a development agreement if that's applicable, if that was determined during the rezone process. Under this scenario, under scenario 2, they would move from their rezone to drafting up preliminary plans that would be reviewed by the CRC group. Once they got approval of preliminary plans from the CRC group, they would be allowed to then apply for their final project plans, which would be your full-blown construction documents at that time. So, but in any instance, it would be basically just analyzing it against code requirements.
So if I'm understanding this right, from our point of view as the council, I'm not really seeing a difference between the two. So I'm wondering if maybe your department or the development community could weigh in on which of the two they prefer down the stream there.
Mr. Stewart?
Well, it seems like that's what Gary was suggesting, that they and probably works get together and decide on which of the two is going to be presented to us. If that's what's being proposed, I'm completely in favor of it.
Unless the council had a strong preference for one or the other for some reason because of things that you've been hearing.
My preference is what your preference is.
My preference would be that
yours and
yeah, to take it and work with not just community development, public works, but everybody who's at CRC,
right.
That whole group. And then we work with that group, refine a specific ordinance language proposal, and then bring that to planning commission, and then bring that back to council at a work meeting and then a council meeting, because it would be an amendment.
But you're more qualified to do that than we are, quite frankly. Put something together. I don't see how we can do that as well as you can do it. With public works and all the other members.
We just wanted to make sure that the council members of the council hadn't been hearing things and there was a preference leaning one way or the other on.
So the first proposal includes the CRC or doesn't include the CRC? Isn't that something that it has to go through, that a project has to go through anything?
It does.
So I'm not seeing the difference, as
The-
far as the preliminary plans. So they wouldn't need a preliminary plan in
Right,
proposal one?
the first stage would be concept plan or preliminary subdivision. Preliminary subdivision actually has a state. The reason why it's called preliminary subdivision is kind of a state code requirement. So that would occur there prior to the rezone. After the rezone, there's no preliminary plans, it's your full project plans. This one just adds a preliminary plan in between the two.
And that preliminary plan, at the end of the day, once they have the rezone, they're working to final, to get completely approved. What our process does is impose an actual application and a fee for a preliminary, and then once they're done with that, and that doesn't go to council or anything, then they have to come in and do a final and make another application and fees and things with that. And so really what you now have are between the two proposals are things after coming to council. Council's interaction is the same in either one. Then after, just administratively, we deal with preliminary and final.
So what you see is no different. This one has an extra step to planning commission, the other one would not, because preliminary project plans go to planning commission. But what you see is no different.
So Gary, you mentioned something on the fees. How will it be, if you go to the 4 steps or the 2 steps after the zone change, will it be more costly then? If we're doing a preliminary plan and a final plan with applications and fees for each of those steps, as compared to just doing the final plan?
Yeah. And there would be a requirement for a planning commission hearing on the preliminary, at which the planning commission really has no discretion, because if the council has granted a rezone, whether with a development agreement or not, then the planning commission has no discretion. It either complies with the zoning ordinance, and if there's a development agreement with the development agreement, or it doesn't. And they have to approve it or not. There's really no discretion in it.
So this would only go to the planning commission after it was rezoned?
Yes.
And in the first option, it would go to the planning commission at all, or in the concept phase?
They would see it as part of the concept. They make a recommendation to you with the rezone
They would still
application.
make a
We're
recommendation,
just
so it's
lumping
whether or
that
not
all
we want to
together.
hear from the planning commission before or after, basically.
You'll still hear from the
We'll still
planning
do it one
commission.
time, and then they'll see it again for the.
And then they'll see it again.
Okay. Mr. Hardy?
Just a comment to point that Mr. Van Buren brought up. The overall cost would be more if they go through all of the steps, but if something is determined to be unworkable during the preliminary plan stage, I imagine that the overall cost would be less for those projects that don't go forward beyond that step.
It could possibly, hopefully, any developers coming in at the concept plan wanting a rezone, they're coming in and sitting down with us before making application for anything, and we're talking with them about high-level infrastructure problems, high-level planning issues, things like that. But yeah, theoretically, if somebody came in and just plowed through without communicating to final, without communicating well with staff, they might find themselves having spent a lot of money, and guess what? The project's just not going to work because it doesn't comply with our code and standards.
I give you one example where that might come about, where Mr. Harding, that example that he just gave, in the 4-step process that you see on the screen right now, the geotech's not required at the concept. Again, you're getting very basic questions getting answered at the concept. But at preliminary, that's when the geotech would come in. The staff's not going to know what the geotech, or generally don't know what the challenges might be with the project. So at the geotech, they might come back and say, hey, this is not going to work, or you're going to have some significant challenges with faults or groundwater or whatever else, the geotech. They haven't expended the money for the final plans at that point. So it might save some costs for the developer if he decides not to move forward at that point. Otherwise, 3-step, they have to do the geotech and the final plans. We get it all at the same time, and we don't get a chance to look at that geotech or other kinds of reports similar to that before they do the final plans.
Mr. Stewart?
Unless I'm missing something, I want to know the planning commission before we see it. Or if I have a planning commission. Or should I have the planning commission's recommendation?
It will.
2 sets of eyes looking at it, so whatever you come up with, hopefully, planning commission sees it before we see it.
And
Both ways it would be.
proposals include that.
Right.
But then in the second proposal, they go twice before the planning commission, so.
3 times?
Or 3.
Twice.
Just twice, and not the final
staff-
project?
Final staff level.
Okay.
Staff level approval.
So.
So
I
no-
don't know
no
if that's
planning commission there?
easier or not easier. This discussion probably needs to be continued, so that because we're way over time. Unless we're ready to make a recommendation or a motion. Mr. Silver?
I'll make a motion, and I think it's basically a restatement of what Mr. Stewart said earlier, and that is that we let staff come back to us with their recommendation of which of these 2 that they would recommend in consultation with developers they work with.
So we just modify that slightly, which, if they come back with something, a combination of these 2, because it's probably not gonna be either or, right? It's gonna be something, it's gonna be a combination of these 2 proposals, more than likely, your proposal.
It could be. I think the concept plan and rezone with the council, that process I'm hearing is, let's do that. If they can get those initial questions answered early. What we need to think a little bit more about is how do we still have good quality reviews as early as possible for a developer for the minimum amount of time and cost for the developer and the city once we get past the rezone decision by the council.
I would second that if that's your motion.
Yes.
And engineering also, the reporting on your side of that as well. Okay. All right.
Do you want to restate that, Mr.
Okay.
I can go back.
Do you want me to restate it, or do you have something?
I'll let you restate it.
Okay. I make a motion that we accept the first 2 steps that are common in both of these proposals and ask staff to come back with a recommendation on what to do about the phases beyond the rezoning.
That's a little different than the first motion, isn't it? It was to come back with a recommendation on the proposals.
Yeah, I guess it was a little different because I was basically restating what Mr. McGinn said, that he felt like we were saying that we were okay with the concept plan, and I just wanted to include that as part of the motion to make that explicit, that we're saying that we're okay with that part of it, but we want a recommendation on which of the 2 proposals to go with, or some combination of the 2 for the stages beyond that.
So just to clarify, the motion is still as you just stated it. What you just said just now was an explanation of why that's the motion you made, right? Is that correct?
Sure.
So so approving the first part, essentially, the concept plan and the rezone, we're approving that, right?
Well,
To come back with a
yeah, I was gonna say,
proposal
you're
with
approving
those-
it in the sense that you're telling community development, that's what you want the
Don't worry about
statutory
that part anymore.
changes to reflect, but you're not actually putting it into code yet.
Right. Okay, second by Mr. Stewart. Any discussion on the motion?
We had a pretty good discussion about, is this making it easier for developments to applicants to get a zone change and then maybe not follow through with what they're presenting. And we talked about all sorts of things that could mitigate that. But so this proposal, or this motion, I don't think it addresses that at all. The council is a certain director. But I'm worried about the process. I want to make sure whatever we're doing here, we're not making our neighborhoods more vulnerable. We're not making our residents more vulnerable.
We require development agreements.
I don't think we should. I agree with that. I'm just saying we're making a change, and I think even though there's no guarantee one way now or after, I do think we are lessening some of that protection. So I am a little bit nervous about that, and I don't think it has to be resolved here. I can resolve it here. I just wanted to voice my concern about making this change in absence of anything else.
Thank you. So, and I have some of I share some of those same concerns. But I think we can have a fuller discussion when this comes back to work session. So are we going to recommend, part of your motion, have it come back on date certain?
What would you like to say? What we would do if this motion is passed, we will then work with the CRC group, and we will work on actual ordinance language and a concept that's, as an administration and as staff we're comfortable with. We would then take that to Planning Commission for a text amendment to various sections of the code. We'd have a hearing with them, talk through these issues with them. They would then make a recommendation to the council on whether to approve that change as staff's proposed it or what changes that they've recommended. And then that would come back to council and follow the normal process, which typically would be a work session and then on to a council meeting.
Okay. Would you let us know when that's ready to come?
Yeah, and we would just do it through the normal process.
Okay. Okay.
So besides working with CRC and Planning Commission, you would have opportunities for the development community
to be able to talk with developers and about that. And then informally and then formally, developers would have, and neighbors and any other interested party would be able to have the opportunity at the Planning Commission at a public hearing. And that's why we would like to take it that way, is because it does give that formal opportunity for people to come in at a hearing and comment on it. And so it would be noticed on the Planning Commission agenda and follow that normal process.
Okay. Any other discussion? Those in favor? You voting unanimous on the alternative? The next item is a discussion regarding lot line adjustment in context of the development review process, and this will be introduced by Chad Hill. And Chad is the survey supervisor. Essentially, note that.
We were approached with a concept to try to streamline a lot of the simple subdivisions that Austin had just mentioned, where we have a simple boundary line agreement in interior lots of the existing subdivision, or we have two parcels that are meets and bounds that are not in an existing subdivision that would like to adjust the parcel or to combine parcels. Currently, the best way we've been doing this has been to do a subdivision plat. Basically, if we have a lot 1 and lot 2 in an existing subdivision, we would vacate those two lots out of that subdivision and then do a new subdivision. Basically, so we have a subdivision inside of a subdivision. It seems a little bit cumbersome. It's actually a very clean method to do that. That's the preferred method for the county recorder when I've spoken with him. It does encumber some time and some processes we do have to go through a final plat to do that. And there's a little bit of a greater cost to the applicant or the developer who is doing this. And traditionally what we've seen is it's someone buys lot 1 and lot 2 and they want to have their house on lot 1 and they want to expand their yard into lot 2, but they want to put a shed on it. And currently we don't allow them to put a shed on that secondary lot without having to combine the lots or different things like that. And so we put this application together that goes through some different languages and a process to be able to allow someone to do that, to be able to use both lots to combine them, or to do a lot line adjustment to adjust the interior lot lines inside of that subdivision or in two parcels that are adjacent to each other. Can I scroll down with this thing? Can you scroll down to basically what this application is? That's good right there. Basic information on the top for the applicant, and then what we put together here is just some simple concepts of what we're doing here, and to make sure that no new dwelling is going to establish, so that we're not creating anything new. We're not creating a new lot. We're not violating any zoning codes with this, and then any public utility easements that are affected by this, they'll either need to be vacated or remain as long as they're not encumbered by anything else, which would come from the lot line adjustment or the combining of the two lots. Can you scroll down just a little bit more? Perfect. Okay. We've tried to streamline it as much as possible by putting together a basic layout, a basic site plan that shows a scale drawing with the adjacent streets, the location of each lot that's going to be adjusted, the dimensions before and after, so that we can see the before and after on the plan. A written legal description prepared by a licensed surveyor, and any easements that are going to be affected by this, and then a notice of approval that we're okay with this. And so this would be essentially recorded at the county. This meets the state requirements for a boundary line agreement when we would all be said and done. And like I said, this has been our stab at trying to streamline some of these smaller, already developed subdivisions, to be able to someone to combine a lot or to adjust an interior lot line, which we haven't had anything very specific to allow that in the past. And then if you wanted to scroll down to the next couple pages, it goes through just some signatures. Go one more, and then one more. Let's see. Okay, now on the exhibits, we would have the legal description prior to the adjustment, and this can be as very basic as it is Lot 1 of Plat A, Subdivision X. That's the official legal description for that lot, and then in Lot 2, we would say, or after adjustment, we would do a meets and bounds description around the parcel, and then we would be able to see the description of the parcel that would be shown on the attached exhibit map that we require. And then it goes through. It could be, there's 3 exhibits. There's an A, B, and C. So in case you were doing one on both sides of your lot, or if you were just doing one with you and one adjacent parcel owner, it would only be one. If you were doing it with just yourself, we would only need just exhibit A. Big example that this kind of got driven was a subdivision that a proposal that we had up on Foothill Drive. We had an existing lot that there were 2 existing lots in the Foothill subdivision that were approved back in the 70s. Since then, we've had sensitive lands approved and other things like that, where if we were to vacate these 2 lots out of their original subdivision and then to combine them into one lot into a new subdivision, they're going to have to meet a new, they're going to have to go down a separate route, and it would basically turn both of those lots into non-buildable building lots. And that was where we really hit hard on trying to figure out a way to combine these 2 lots without having to do a brand new subdivision and vacate them out of their original subdivision and be able to proceed forward with the property as it is. That's kind of what we've taken our best step in that direction with that. there any questions or comments on any of that, Bill?
Is a specific provision given in state code that allows cities to do this without doing a subdivision plat? And most cities I'm aware of have this type of track that allow people to make these minor adjustments without doing the plat.
Yeah, and like I said, this would be something very small where we're not affecting the entire subdivision. We would be affecting one, maybe two lots inside of the subdivision or an existing parcel by doing so.
So as I hear this, you're not giving the subdivision the ability to create a new lot, but maybe combine new lots.
Yes, yes.
And with that being said, I looked at your signatures there. I didn't see anything for an existing homeowners association to become involved if they're affecting that. Does that affect that? If they're, because it might affect with one lot and they're getting a second association fee, and all of a sudden you combine it, there's only one association fee then.
That is something that we did think of. We didn't put a signature area for that, but it's something we need to consider a little bit more along those lines, because yes, you are correct. If it is in a homeowners association and they're paying two fees on two separate lots, now they combine a lot, is the association going to be okay with them only paying one fee for that?
So just just having the association sign off could.
We would just have a signature approval or something for the homeowners association as that would come about, yes.
I'm aware of an instance where something like this would have helped an owner, a potential owner in my neighborhood. So I definitely see the value of this. It just raises a little bit of a red flag when we're talking about, well, I have the sensitive lands principles that we follow, and if we had something like this, we could get around that. It makes me wonder, like, are we then putting in something that, if we might regret later on if the hillside shifts or whatever. That raised some concerns for me. If neither of these lots would be buildable now, do we really want to get around that?
The lots are buildable now. The size of the home that they wanted to put on there, it would have spanned both the property line. It would have went across, so it would have been on lot 1 and lot 2.
Right.
And so that was where the concern originally came from that.
But if the lots were being created now, neither of them would be buildable, or the one full one would be buildable.
So under our current hillside ordinance, we restrict any grading or construction in areas that exceed 30% or greater slopes. But we have a significant number of existing platted lots throughout our hillside area that are technically buildable under the standard that was in place at the time that they were created. And so what this allows us to do, it doesn't allow a property owner to go and create new lots and get around anything. What it, in a sense it's doing is saying, in those instances, rather than having to go back through and say, no, rather than build what you really want, we're going to make you build 2 small homes, just to comply with the ordinance. We're trying to be a little more flexible and saying, let's do what's reasonable here, and if it's in the best interest of the property owner and the city to say, let's expand that building area by this lot line adjustment process, and only build one structure. It's probably a better thing for the city than to try to put 2 substandard homes in these areas.
And engineering is going to still require geotech on the house. That's not going to change that.
It doesn't change any of the facts of any of the requirements that they have to go through to show that things are stable and buildable.
So often when I think of a lot line adjustment, it moves one way or the other a little bit. In this case, it could be completely dissolved and the 2 lots combined.
Yes, in theory, yes. So there would be that concept where we have a lot line adjustment where you could say, I agree with my neighbor, we're going to move our property line 5 feet to the west. And he's okay with that, I'm okay with that, we both go through this. That would be the first scenario. The other scenario would be, I own lot 1 and lot 2, and I want to basically combine them for taxing purposes, so I'm not paying taxes on both lots as a residential building lot. One would be just incorporated into my lot. That would be the other option with that. So we're not creating any new lots. We're still leaving that, and then essentially that lot is still there as a pseudo. I mean, it's really hard to describe this. The lot 1 and lot 2 does not dissolve. So if we're combining lot 1 and lot 2 as an overall, I own both lots and I want to combine them. Lot 2 is not off the books. It's still a lot 2, but for taxing purposes and for as far as as we interpret it in Public Works is we're combining those 2 lots as to be one lot, a kind of a pseudo lot, for a lack of a better term. And so as far as the county goes, they're going to tax it as one lot. But if we were to do a title research or a title report on that, it would show a lot 1 and lot 2. They have been combined for taxing purposes. And there's a deed, a sample deed that I've shown on here that I've coordinated with the county recorder on to make sure that we have the correct verbiage on there that he's okay with doing it to combine those 2 lots for a taxing purpose for that. So does that help answer your question?
And so someone could build a house or have a house and then build the shed or do something and use it like it's one lot, but it's really still 2.
Correct.
Okay.
Because am I wrong in saying that, Bill, that in order to build, we wouldn't allow an accessory building to be built on that lot if they hadn't been put together, correct? Or combined together, correct? Okay.
I had a comment. I need to echo Bill's comment on this. This is a very common practice in cities. This is a minor subdivision or a lot line adjustment. You find this throughout the Wasatch Front, and it's very, very common. And it would probably help in many of the circumstances that we've heard in this committee that Dave Sewell heads up. We've had a couple of examples where this kind of a process would help.
We've had, since I've been in the city for 2.5 years, I've seen one subdivision be combined into one lot and then separated back out into 2 lots. So it's went 3 different steps and back to where it originally was just since I've been here. So it's a common practice that we see. The problem is now we're getting subdivisions on top of subdivisions on top of subdivisions, and it gets a little bit cumbersome when we start doing that when it comes to a recording standpoint of it. So.
Are there other questions?
Dave's got one.
Chad's done a significant amount of research, and I just wanted to thank him for those efforts. And I think what he's really tried to do is listen to some of the comments that were heard by the council committee and try to address some of those, maybe that low-hanging fruit of, when can we be a lot more responsive than we are. And I think one of the questions that, that is, being brought with this proposal is, do we want to take this and just do this through a policy procedure type action as staff, or would you as a council prefer us to actually include this in ordinance and go back through, take this to the planning commission and back to the council as an ordinance amendment so that we officially recognize this through our city ordinances?
Any thoughts on that, Mr. Sewell?
What do you see the trade-offs between those 2 approaches being, or do you have a preference?
I think functionally it works probably the same either way. The only thing that maybe doing it by ordinance does is give somebody, something that they can refer to in code and say, Provo has this process, and it's a defined process. There's no questions whether or not I can or can't do that.
Brian Jones may have an opinion legally this in ordinance it might protect the city a little bit more if it was called, put in.
Yeah, it might. I mean, I think it probably provides 2 protections. One is actually protecting the employee from someone coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to go to the mayor and ask him to change this because it's just an administrative procedure. And 2, it probably prevents some kind of claim that the policy is being discriminatorily applied differently to different people, because you've got we've actually got it in the code.
So is there a motion to send this to the planning commission and come back to us to council meeting? Mr. Knight, is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor? Thank you. Voting was unanimous in the affirmative. Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. The next item is discussion on budget committee's recommendations regarding the impact fee process. And this, let's see. What do you think, Mr. Parker? This was supposed to be an hour-long discussion.
Yes.
Mr. Parker gave us the budget committee a presentation on impact fees, and then the budget committee did make a recommendation that we wanted to bring to the council. We have the Vision 2050 discussion. We also have unclassified civil service, which comes to our council meeting tonight. And then it won't change. So I don't know, it's up to you. If you want to condense it today, or if you would like more time to give the full presentation, we could also.
Totally your discretion. We can go either way.
Okay.
So I can try to speed through it, and if questions exceed time available, we'll always continue it to another meeting. So.
Okay, why don't we do that?
Okay, all right, thanks. So Kelsey, can you go ahead and say that? Okay. Let me just run through quickly. We did a presentation with the budget committee, I think 3 weeks ago maybe, and talked about impact fees. And so we thought it would be well to just give you kind of a state of the city on impact fees and the state of the law as it relates to how we manage impact fees. I know Deanne Hewish is here from the Home Builders Association, and she may want to weigh in as well, but let me just quickly run through kind of the basic standards that we talked about at the budget committee. So impact fees, first of all, are a one-time fee that is imposed by the city on new construction to fund the cost of infrastructure to meet the needs of new development. That's kind of a mouthful, but basically impact fees are assessed on development. They are one-time fees that contribute to the funding that's created for capital improvements that are related to the cost of new development. So it's based on providing the same level of service to the new development as is provided to the citizens in Provo currently. So you can't use impact fees to fund expansion of service levels. You can fund existing service levels for new development, new residents. The list of potential projects that can be used by impact fees is largely determined by the CIP, which is driven by master plans. And so whether those are transportation master plans, utility plans, parks and rec, as we go through and identify the needs of the city over the next 20 years, we attempt to define projects which need to be funded to meet the needs of growth. And those projects can be funded by impact fees. So under the statute today, there are 7 categories for impact fees. So we can use them for water and wastewater, stormwater, electric power, parks and trails, transportation, and public safety facilities, meaning predominantly police and fire stations or public safety buildings. So let me run through kind of the key statutes. First of all, we can't cure existing deficiencies. And so one of the things we have to look at is if we're going to use impact fees, we can't fix an existing problem. We can only plan ahead to prevent problems in the future. We can't raise the level of existing service. So if we have fire stations in the city and our average response time is a certain level, and we want to build a new fire station, we can do that, but we can't use those dollars to increase the level of service or then essentially reduce response times across the city. We can preserve the same response time that we have for the area of new development. So again, we just have to be cautious about how we implement the fees. We can't include any ongoing costs or overhead costs. They are direct construction, design, construction, inspection costs. And so we can't use impact fees to fund ongoing operations or staffing or any of those kinds of things. We can't use impact fees for fire trucks. There was a time period in the law when small communities and counties could actually use impact fees to buy fire apparatus. Can't do that anymore. And so when we talk about public safety facilities, it really is about buildings. We must notify and involve key stakeholder groups. As Deanne and I were talking earlier, The last time we went through an impact fee analysis, the home builders and realtors sat at the table with us as we went through the process and helped us select the consulting firms that were necessary, and we proposed to do something like that if we proceed with another impact fee study. We have to consider all available revenue sources in the study. So impact fees can only close the gap for development. So if we have grants, for example, or if we have other sources of funding that can be used for meeting the needs of new growth, we have to use those first and then use the impact fees as kind of a gap closer. And then we have to prepare and adopt an impact fees facilities plan, which is kind of an amalgamation of all of the existing capital improvement projects which are related to growth. And then the revenue must be maintained in a separate interest-bearing account. And we actually have 7 of those, well, 6 of those, because we use 6 of the impact fees that are allowed under the state law today. And so we actually account for those in separate funds. We account for the impact fees paid by the individual developer or builder or homeowner, whoever makes the payment of the impact fee. And that will become evident in a minute why we have to do that. And then the revenue must be encumbered or spent within 6 years of its collection. And if we don't, then we have to rebate to the person who paid the impact fee pro rata kind of what's left. And so if an impact fee was paid 6 years ago and we haven't actually spent those dollars on a project, we have to write a check back to the original payee for what they contributed to impact fees. So there's a heavy motivation to get projects done and to get those funds encumbered within a 6-year time period. And the revenue can also be used to reimburse prior capacity expansions. So for example, if we build a new wastewater treatment plant and we build future capacity into that, we can actually use future impact fees to reimburse the city for part of its expenses related to that, to essentially overbuilding the wastewater treatment plant.
Over what period of time can we recapture?
Again, a 6-year time frame. Yep. And then the city must file an annual report with our comprehensive annual financial report. You'll see that in a couple of weeks when we present the CAFR to you, and you'll see that there's a section of the CAFR that gives you an individual fee-by-fee analysis of what's gone into the fund, what's come out of the fund, and what's remaining in the fund. We have to file that with the state auditor every year. Okay, so how are fees calculated? So it's a lot more complex than this. This is the basic structure. So the city has to use an impact fee consultant. Some of us call that the Full Employment Consultant Act. So we can't do this ourselves currently. Now, there is negotiation underway between the home builders, realtors, and the League of Cities that would allow cities to do their own work again, which we had the privilege of doing for many years before just a few years ago. But for the current time being, we have to retain an outside consultant to do an impact fee study. And the consultant will then apportion the costs of the improvements that are attributable to growth. So they'll go through all of our master plans, all of our capital improvement plans, and say, for this project, X of it is X% is responding to new growth or anticipated new growth. The remainder is existing service level, and therefore we can't use impact fees for that part. It determines what portions benefit existing city residents, and then verifies that the city growth projections are reasonable over a 10-year period. And so we'll anticipate growth, population growth in the city over a 10-year cycle, and the consultant has to say, yeah, that's a reasonable assumption. So the formula basically is the cost of projects attributable to growth divided by the number of units of growth expected. And that can be, again, generally you think about that as dwelling units, but we also can use factors like square feet or plumbing fixtures, which for example we do with the wastewater impact fee today. So if you come in with an apartment complex, we'll look at essentially how many drains in that complex go to the wastewater system, and there's a fee per drain. Essentially, so every toilet, every floor drain, anything that feeds to the sewer system would be the basis for calculation of the impact fee. So we can also use impervious surface like we do with wastewater. So if you come in and take an open field, which now will will allow surface water to drain into the soil, and you make that roof or pavement, then that's part of what calculates your stormwater impact fee. Trip generation, again, like we use for our transportation impact fee. And then that results in an impact fee per some unit. And that's then what's adopted by the council and put in the consolidated fee schedule. What other cities do is irrelevant in the statute. Every impact fee study has to be unique to the city. As a practical matter, we always look at the question of how do our impact fees compare with others. But from the statutory perspective, it is totally immaterial. It can't even be considered in the decision process. So the consultant then has to certify that the fees include only allowable projects, allowable costs. There's no O&M. Projects will not raise existing service levels. There's no overhead included. Fees are offset by any additional revenue sources like grants or other things that we might use. The study complies in each and every relevant aspect with the State Impact Fees Act. So Provo status, quickly, the impact fees were last adjusted in 2007, which has now been 9 years. They were set in 2004 and actually phased in over 3 years. And so the delta between the old impact fees and the new impact fees were phased in a third each year for 3 years, so that it allowed the development community essentially time to respond and prepare. The master plans that we have been done over the last 5 years in all functional areas except for public safety, which we've not done a public safety facilities plan. We've not had a public safety facilities impact fee. That's an option we could consider that would allow us particularly to develop funding around either a new public safety center or potentially a new fire station on the west side.
Exactly, fire station on the west side.
Yes. Yeah, that could be part of that analysis. And that's a study we'd have to do in conjunction with the impact fee analysis. Transportation master plan is expected next year. Ours is about 5 years old, Dave. And so again, some additional projects, some projects have been completed in the former master plan. There's probably some new projects, particularly given things like the relocation of the high school and other things that might change the mix of projects. And so we do have funding anticipated for next fiscal year to do the transportation master plan. Most of the plans included impact fee analyses, but some are now dated. Those have to be updated by a consultant that we would bring in to help us. Legal has been working with a consultant to evaluate the plans and try to establish the delta of what we need to update and bring in, and then we will. So we still need to go through an RFP process to identify a consultant to gather the data, evaluate it, put together the facilities plan and recommend impact fees. So that's still yet to be done. So there's some policy questions involved, which council will need to respond to at some point. Number one is who should bear the cost of new growth? Is that borne entirely by new growth, borne some by new growth, or borne none by new growth? And different cities have made different choices along the way. Our neighbors to the north in Orem have never had impact fees. They are considering some today. They're going through their process. But their argument has been, we want to stimulate all the new growth we can, and therefore we won't charge any of the impact to new growth. We'll charge it to the existing ratepayers or taxpayers. That's a perfectly acceptable policy choice. You can also go to the other extreme and say all new growth, all impacts of new growth will be paid by new growth. And there's obviously some things in between too. So those are some policy issues that have to be considered. Councilmember Harding.
Where are we at when we answer this question?
In 2007, 100% of the demands of new growth were covered by the impact fees. Now, obviously that slipped some because costs have increased over time. And some of our master plans are a little bit out of date. And so probably as a practical matter, we're not charging the full cost of new growth for new growth today. Okay, Dave, did you have a question?
Same question.
Okay, great. Should impact fees be more geographically limited? So for example, if you wanted to charge a public safety impact fee for a new fire station, you could say only developments north of Center Street and west of I-15 will pay that impact fee, and only those fees will fund a new West Side fire station. The dilemma with that challenge, and we hear a lot about parks and other things, why are our impact fees in our neighborhood only going to our neighborhood park? And the reason we have not done that historically, even though it's more transparent, is that 6-year time constraint. And if you can't generate enough impact fees, let's say the economy takes a downturn and home building stops, the clock doesn't stop. And so you may not generate anywhere near enough impact fees to cover your project. And at that point, you're writing checks back to developers who paid those impact fees. And so we have called the city as one service area for all impact fees. And then we just have the city council each year in their development of the budget and the 5-year CIP to make decisions about where those impact fees go. So again, our argument would be that's a very transparent process. It's seen every year. It's very public. And so it's a different approach than some cities have taken with their impact fees. Another question is, how often should fees be updated? Should we do them all at once, every few years? Should we do them every year? So as a master plan is developed, go through the impact fee study and involvement of the stakeholders and adopt them. Should we do half every 3 years, for example? And so again, the question of, right now we're far enough out of date that I think our recommendation would be we should do one comprehensive plan today, but should we spread those out more frequently over time? And that's again an issue we raised with the budget committee. And then finally, what's the role of competitive forces in the market? So impact fees can sometimes drive development from one city to another. And I had a memorable interchange once with the mayor of Spanish Fork when we were both recruiting the same retailer, and the retailer went to Spanish Fork and didn't come to Provo. And part of the challenge was that one of our impact fees was about $1 million different, and Spanish Fork had no impact fee. So actually the mayor of Spanish Fork had come to the finance group in Mountain Land Association of Governments and wanted money to build a major new arterial street. And so I came back to him and said, tell me about your impact fees for transportation. He said, oh, we don't have any. I said, well, it's pretty hard for those of us who've bitten the bullet, taken the hard political stance to put that fee into place in our communities, and now have you come back and say, well, we're not going to do that in our community, but we want your sales tax dollars to fund our road improvement. And he didn't have a great answer for that. But again, that plays into the equation sometimes, but what other cities will do or not do. Yes, sir.
Did you get the money?
They did not get the money. Not so far, but it may come yet. So, okay, so I wanted to just share with you some quick comparisons as far as the current impact fee landscape in cities that we kind of compete with. So I tried to pick a few in Utah County and a few in Salt Lake County to give you a little sense of what it looks like. So currently, as you know, Provo has no public safety impact fee. So on a single-family residential development, single-family residential unit, so a home that's built in the community, right now in Payson, there's a $350 public safety impact fee, no streets impact fee, and a $2,800 park impact fee. And so you can kind of see where we compare. Provo's at the top, and so you can see if you're actually thinking about, have we left some money on the table from a competitive standpoint? The answer is probably yes in most areas. So our parks fee is kind of in the in the upper third or so. Our streets impact fee is about in the middle or to low middle, and our public safety fee is zero, which obviously is at the bottom. So again, that gives you a little sense of kind of how that lays out. Now there are obviously other impact fees. There's water and wastewater and stormwater, but these are the ones that tend to get highlighted in the discussion. So this just gave you a quick viewpoint. So Dave.
So legally, we can't set ours based on these.
That's correct.
What's the comparison purposes?
Right, and it's good to know. So if, for example, your impact fee that comes out of the study says that your public safety impact fee should be $1,600, you might say, whoa, maybe we don't want to go that high if we want to be competitive. Now it gets more important when you get into commercial development because overall, again, the developer will look, a single-family residential developer, and Deanne, feel free to correct me, but we'll look kind of at the global cost of impact fees. They don't care so much about which ones are how much, but the bottom line really affects them because could create a significantly higher home price in Provo than it might in some other community or vice versa.
And
Yeah.
those three are really subjective.
Yes.
They're very hard to measure, those
That's
three.
right. And those tend to be the most controversial ones as we get into the process. So let me show you the same fees for retail development, and this is based on a per square foot equivalent. So I tried to take the numbers and look at how they would apply on a per square foot basis. So you can see, for example, we don't charge a parks impact fee on retail. No one does because, again, the demand for parks are not related to a retail development. They might be, there certainly are to residential, and actually one city charges a park impact fee for office, which is kind of interesting. That's the only one I found so far. But so you can look at ours, and so our street fee is relatively high, but significantly below Draper and Salt Lake and West Jordan, who will charge many more dollars per square foot. So again, for a significant retail development, again, the decisions typically aren't driven by impact fees, but they can play a role in location decisions. And then this is the office one, and actually Sandy charges a nickel per square foot, which goes into their park impact fee fund. I don't know what they think there, other than that maybe office employees would go out at lunch and play Frisbee in a local park. Maybe that's where they're coming from, but they're the only ones I found that are charging a park impact fee on office. But again, you can see how likely it's not going to create a huge disparity among the cities, but again, part of the point is they're kind of all over the map, and each city figures out individually what its own needs are, and then goes through the process of selecting the impact fee. So that's the very quick summary that we shared with the budget committee, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And then you may want to look at the budget committee recommendation and decide from there. So
Yeah, I just have one question.
Yeah.
When, do you wait for the council to request to hire consultants to do the impact fee study? What's the process there?
Well, number one, we're not funded for one this year, and so we would need to come to you for appropriation to get that underway. It is a legislative process to set the impact fees, not unlike any other fee you would set. And so at the end of the day, it's your call as to what you do. So the last time we did this, the council actually appointed 2 council members to essentially convene the group. And then we added some staff people, and we added the home builders and realtors and others around the table. And then we went through the process, which took us then, I'm thinking it was like 6 to 9 months to go through the process. And then the committee, the 2 council members came back and actually sponsored the legislation to establish the impact fees. So we could follow that same model. We could, there are a variety of ways we could do it. I think the 2 key things are, we want to make sure the stakeholders are at the table with us, and we want to make sure that we've hired the right consulting group to do this. And there's 4 or 5 of them around the state that have done impact fees and are recognized. Actually, the state private property ombudsman has a list that you must choose from that group, and so it's a fairly limited universe. But they pre-qualify consultants who are able to do this, and so again, we have to follow their guidance. But there's some good firms, and there's several of the cities around us have used some and some others. And so again, it's we would just go through I think we'd go through and put together a request for proposals and get a response back, and then we'd come to you to get funding. So, Councilor.
Would there be any wisdom in maybe holding off until the question of whether we still need a consultant in the future is resolved?
There could be. I think one of the challenges that might be worth investing in a consultant now, as opposed to waiting a couple of years to see if they go away or the requirement goes away, is that the last time we did this was so long ago that the laws changed half a dozen times in the last 9 years. And so again, we're probably not as up to speed on all the intricacies of the law. And so it would make sense maybe to bring somebody in to get it done one time right, make sure it's right, and then we'll have a model we can follow when we move into future years, and we can do it with our own staff. So that'd be my only thought on that one.
Mr. Stewart, did you have a comment?
Are you going to give us the budget committee?
No, I was going to let you do that.
Those. Yeah, I
So
can give those.
yeah.
And I
So
can do that. Now, thank you, Mr.
okay,
Ford.
thanks.
Appreciate the presentation. And one more question for you, Mr.
Yes.
So, one way of evaluating our impact fees, in my opinion, is to look at like Broadview Shores. Now, I don't know how fast it's gonna build out, because it doesn't all happen in 6 years, that's a problem. But it seems like we bonded for, was it 20 million? To build infrastructure necessary. And I was just kind of curious, based on the projected impact fees, for the number of units that are gonna be built there, what is our recovery rate? Are we getting our 20 million back, or how much?
Yeah, and again, the 20 million really was, it included existing deficiencies as well as planning for future growth. So you can't attribute all of the bond to that. But yeah, you could recoup, again, you could recoup dollars out of that. The other possibility is we didn't fund 20 years worth of projects with $20 million. And so there will be projects out there that weren't funded by the infrastructure bond that could be used. And so again, that's a process we'll just have to go through as we go through the budgeting process and determine, do we want to fund more projects with the existing flow of impact fees, or do we want to take some of those impact fees, recoup them, and put them back in the wastewater fund, for example, for future projects. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a wash, but again, the bonds are already issued, debt service is underway. So again, I think from our standpoint, we could certainly consider either option as we go forward. That makes sense?
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the recommendations from the budget committee were, number one, the city should hire a consultant to, based on the presentation that we received from Mr. Parker, the city should hire a consultant to conduct an impact fee study, which should be complete by the end of 2017 calendar year. And the other, and we also, as a committee, answered a few of the questions that Mr. Parker posed that would be a recommendation from the committee as well. The first is who should bear the cost of new growth? And the committee felt that all new growth should bear the cost of its own impact. The other question was, should impact fees be more geographically limited? And the committee recommended that the geographical scope of the impact fees should consist of the entire city for the reasons that Mr. Parker outlined. And the last question that the committee answered was, how often should the fees be updated? The fees should be updated as the master plan in each area is updated, and then the fees should be implemented over a 2-year time period. I think it makes sense, as Mr. Parker mentioned too, if we have a consultant to do that plan all at once and then phase in after that. But those are the recommendations that you see before you from the budget committee. So I guess we'd be looking for, Mr. Parker.
If I remember correctly, those first recommendations aren't change in policy, are they? They're the continuing.
Existing policy.
Existing.
Mr. Winterton, did you have a question?
Yes, the only thing that there was some discussion around was the new growth should bear all the cost of its own impact. And there were advantages, and we did to incentivizing some of the growth that we wanted to at certain times. And we didn't want it to become arbitrary, or and yet there are certain things that we might feel like we want to incentivize. Is there some way to play into that way, or once we set these impact fees, are they pretty well set, or?
Yeah, the impact fee analysis that's done actually sets the maximum impact fee that can be charged. It doesn't set the absolute number. And so then that becomes a question of, much as we suggested, if you find that one of your impact fees is way out of whack with the rest of them, you might say, gosh, in this case, we don't want to impose the full impact fee for a variety of reasons, but you can never impose more than the impact fee study tells you can impose.
And you can't do it per area, certain areas. Once you have an impact fee, is it for the whole city always?
It doesn't always have to be, but again, given the statutory constraints of the 6-year time frame, I think it would be a mistake to go more geographically limited. You might collect a lot of impact fees and only fund 30% of a project, and then you say, well, we can't get the project underway because we don't have enough money, and so then you turn back all those dollars and start over. So
that's not necessarily what I'm thinking though. But if we have a specific project that we specifically like in a certain area,
yes, for sure,
then we limit those, cut those down. It becomes very arbitrary, and it's a little scary to me to do that.
Notice we've never brought you a proposal to incentivize using impact fees. It's it's a terrible
Precedent.
hard precedent,
to
terrible path,
start,
and how do you
yes.
justify to a builder just come in and spend $1 million in impact fees? We waived them for the last guy, but not for you. And I'll tell you what, a lot of these people end up in my office when they see their bill. And I have to be able to look them in the eye and say, we've charged everybody this amount, including Action Target, when they built their building. And you can get some very, very high impact fees. The builders of the village, I believe it was in excess of $1 million. Remember, Bill?
Yeah, the park impact fee alone was like 1.2 million.
Yeah. And
From the
so
village.
you add that on to the cost of the development, they're going to be in my office asking about.
And that's real hard to go this way and that way with different people. I understand that.
There are other ways of deferring those costs. With City View, we had
Yeah.
the tax increment financing.
We allowed tax
option
increment financing
pay for
to
those
pay for the
so
impact fees. And
there
when we
are-
did the convention center, the county asked us to waive impact fees, and we declined to do that. But what we did instead was we paid them out of the general fund. And so the impact fees still went to the utilities, but they were paid for by a general fund appropriation. And so again, those have been two strategies we've used in the past to help soften the blow. But again, those were pretty unique circumstances, but we haven't just done a blanket waiver or said if you build in a certain area, it'll be a 50% reduction. We haven't done any of those.
Mr. Connect.
So, help me out, Wayne, you've got a good memory. It seems like there were some nonprofits, might even have been NeighborWorks, that had a project in the past, could have been Franklin Commons, but asked for the city to waive impact fees, and the mayor at that time said yes.
That one I don't remember for sure. I do know that we, as a practical matter, we give impact fee credits. So let me give you an example. When I think of the right example, when let's say a developer comes in and wants to build some student housing, and he takes down 3 older single-family homes and builds 6 new apartment units on the place where the 3 single-family homes used to exist. He gets an impact fee credit for the net impact that he produces. So for example, if you had a park impact fee, the assumption is whether they paid it or not, the 3 old dwelling units that are coming out had an impact on the park system. And so when he builds his 6-unit apartment complex, he only pays 3 times the per unit park impact fee. And so there have been some times when we have allowed larger owners, I'm trying to think through, make sure I say this right, who would take down some old units to actually carry a credit over to the development of some new units. And we've done that. I don't recall the specific one you mentioned. It would not surprise me though. There was a time early in the impact fee process when there might have been some waivers early on. I can't remember for sure which ones were which.
Could be the building permit fee.
Yeah, and again, in some cases we've done other fees other than impact fees. So plan review fee or building permit fee that we've waived under certain circumstances.
As an incentive for what you wanted to have happen.
Yeah. So that there is provision for us to do that, and we've done that in a few occasions. But I think I can count those on 2 hands in the 13 years I've been here. So where we've done anything like that.
Are there any other questions or recommendation or a motion?
So it says at the bottom, how often should the fees be updated? And that's a great question. Right now, we're recommending that we do them all because it's been so long.
Yes.
And then it says, gee, if we update it as the master plan in each area is updated, that could be quite a few iterations.
Yes. Yeah, you could be doing them annually, pretty much. I mean, if you assume there's 6 impact fees right now, and if you want to update the master plans are updated roughly every 5 years, that would tell you you'll be doing some, at least 1 every year and maybe 2 in a year. And so again, that's, and I think what we'd suggest is that if that's the way you want to go, that we make the impact fee analysis a part of the master planning process. So we actually have the master plan consultant impact fee analysis as a part of the master plan. Again, we bring the stakeholders in and go through that whole process. So the update to those impact fees could be just budgeted along with the cost of the master plan.
Yeah, my question was it cheaper to do it maybe that way all at once rather than every year we got to do a little bit, which is cheaper for us? Hiring
Again, if in fact, as Dan suggested, the requirement to hire a consultant approved by the ombudsman goes away, then you just use your regular, so if it's Horrocks Engineering that's doing the transportation master plan, they'd also do the impact fee analysis. Or we could just take their data, do our own impact fee analysis and come to you with recommendations. So again, I think it's not a bad answer to do them just as we go. And that makes some sense to me for sure.
Mr. Sharkey?
I have no data to support this one way or the other, but it's actually, and in my experience, we've always done it in conjunction with the master plan updates. And the advantage of that is it keeps it up to date as you've updated your information and it just becomes part of the process. And then we never have these 12-year gaps where we haven't had one updated. So my recommendation, if you were to ask me, my recommendation would be to do it as part of the process.
The other thing we haven't really talked about other than just in the discussion is a public facilities, public safety facilities master plan, which we have not done. And if that's part of what you'd like to do as well, then we would need to kick that off at the same time we do the impact fee analysis, try to get that data gathered before our consultants finished with their review. So we want to get that underway as well quickly.
Mr. Stewart?
For the purpose of discussion, I'd like to make a motion that we move ahead with the budget committee recommendations, including that we do a public safety fee analysis.
And can I add to your motion about a creation of a committee because we would need to have a committee formed to move this forward, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's the motion.
Okay.
Can I ask
Mr.
about
Mayor?
timing? Because as Wayne mentioned, if it's soon, we'd want to come to you with appropriations. And I'm making an assumption that your motion would not have us wait.
We're not having you wait and we need appropriate money to do it.
Okay. And there's a motion by Mr. Stewart. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Connect. Any discussion on the motion? And I guess we need to decide, should we decide the council members or the committee, or should come back in the next work session with
Say do it separately from the motion. You're authorizing the creation of a committee. You can do that separately.
and we could come back, at a future council date with those.
Gives you time to find out who's interested in participating.
Okay. Okay, is there any further discussion on the motion? Those in favor? Thank you. The voting is unanimous and affirmative. So now with the committee, putting the committee together, is there just anyone interested in being part of that? Mr. Campion? Thank you. Is there someone else who would want to be, Mr. Winterton? Okay. Would you like to come back in the next meeting with recommendation on who to have on that committee? Maybe working with Mr. Parker. It sounds like it's a joint type committee.
The involvement of some of the stakeholders, I think, was real key. I wasn't here last time, but I understand it was real key in having consensus moving forward.
So did we look at the members last time? The home builders?
Yeah, typically home builders and realtors have been the key ones. I don't know, Deanna, is there anybody else that you've seen involved in
No, it's just
places?
usually the Utah County Realtors and the Utah Valley Home Builders.
So we'll just work with those two entities to have them send us people that they'd like to have involved. And then we would probably use our department directors as well as the council members involved. Then whoever the council members involved will have to bring the recommendation back and get the process rolling legislatively.
And could you do that by the next meeting? Could you come back with a committee recommendation? Is that, it's in December 6th. Does that work?
That's correct.
Will you help us with those recommendations? I guess give us some.
Well, I think we'll want to know who you want from the council to be there, and then we would.
Mr. Richardson and Mr. Van Buren have volunteered to do that.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we can, yeah, and I think again, we'll ask the stakeholders and we'll talk internally about who we want from the city staff on the committee. We're happy to bring those names back to you if you like.
So by December 6th, then we'd like the proposal to present to the council on the committee.
Can we make a motion just so that we need to make a motion for forming committees with our council members? We just make that part of the motion.
Well, you'll need to at the time that you formally approve the committee. I mean, you don't necessarily
We need
need
to
to
do that at this
now,
point. Okay,
but you could if you wanted those.
so we can just do it on December 6th.
Okay.
I think that sounds good. Are you good with that, Mr. Van Buren, Mr. Richardson? Any concerns? Council members, okay. All right, thank you. The next item of business is a discussion regarding sections in Vision 2050.
Madam Chair.
Sections 3.
If I may, we're 25 minutes behind schedule now, and the next item is 75 minutes.
We'll do it in 30. I've been communicating with Mr. Pepperoni. He thinks it can be a shorter discussion, so.
Do we have time for a break?
Just break if you need to. You know what, I think, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have Mr. Pepperoni, if you're good with that. Mr. Pepperoni, what's your time frame? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break then. Start again. We have a discussion next on regarding sections in Vision 2050. Sections 3 through 6, and Mr. Pepperoni will lead this discussion.
Thank you very much for sending into me, emailing into me ahead of time your comments and your suggestions. That was very helpful. What I've done is I've taken those comments and I've synthesized them onto these 2 pages. If you made a correction or suggestion that was grammatical or it was stylistic, but did not change the meaning of something, I'm going to adopt those things. So we're not going to go through all of the comments everyone sent in. We're going to go through those that I think we need to talk about or some level of decision needs to be made. So section 3 simply suggests to change the title as such from recreation and parks to arts, recreation, and entertainment. Okay with that?
I still like parks. Does that exclude parks?
I'm assuming the thought was that parks were included within recreation, but whatever you.
Personally, I think parks can be, I think of recreation and some of the activities we do at the rec center. And I think of parks as a different animal.
Internally there, we do them separately because they're 2 very distinct divisions in the city. I don't know if public sees them different, but we see them internally as different.
So, this one was my recommendation, and it's just, I'm not married to it, it was reading through, there were parts that talked about, let's see, it's the 3rd paragraph. Provo has several world-class facilities and opportunities for cultural arts, entertainment, and recreation for all residents. And I didn't know if that was captured in the title, Recreation and Parks. Is there a title for the section that captures cultural arts, entertainment, as well as recreation, as well as parks? I mean, obviously, we don't want to have just a giant list of things, but how do we capture?
I think you're close. If you just had comma parks and entertainment.
Arts, parks and recreation and entertainment? I'm happy with that.
Okay, very good. This is actually the middle paragraph under the introduction. It was suggested that this be added, that these words be stricken and that be added. So recreation has the capacity to build communities and offer many social benefits. The participation in recreation and leisure activities are essential factors in not only individual well-being, but are major contributors to community health. Does corrections sound agreeable?
Take silence as a yes.
3, 2, 1. Okay, we're moving on. Goal 3.1, simply to add the phrase and ability levels. Just adding that phrase.
I think it's wise to add it. It is I don't think it's any small thing to accomplish. You'd be aware of it.
Okay, there was a question that in 3.14, will this interfere with the collection of park impact fees, which is funny that we just had that discussion. My feeling is, as long as it has this qualifier when applicable, we should keep it. And the reason I say that is, I think this very well could play into the West Side plan. I think we could end up having provisions that say we want developers to have 25% open space within their project. They can move the density off that 25% within their project. But as long as they're able to move that density within their project, they should still pay our park impact fee. They're not losing any density for providing that open space. So I just think because that we have this qualifier, I think this may come into play on the West Side, and I don't think we should. I don't think it conflicts with impact fees, and I think to take it out now, we may regret that in just a couple of months. Is that all right? 4.2, it was just, the question was asked, should we refer to the June sucker specifically? Should we just strike that? I'm fine.
Strike it, it won't be forgotten.
I'm fine with striking it.
Nobody's going to just take it out of ours. But
6 other agencies.
And these corrections are from the last draft. That wasn't anything, that wasn't new. This is from the last draft. So that was the only question, is to strike that. So that sounds good. Let me scroll down.
So 4.22, where says support the goals of the Utah Lake Commission, and I had asked to add that align with the goals of Provo City. Because I don't know what all of the Utah Lake Commission's goals are.
I think I added that qualifier. That align with Provo City. There it is.
Oh, right.
So I just haven't gotten to you yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But,
I thought you were already past that, okay.
Sorry, it does jump around a little bit. I'm sorry for that.
That's okay.
But if you see something else that I've left out or something that's important to you, then let me know. So are we okay with this? So the question was, these seem to conflict. This one talks about restoration of the lakefront and wetland natural areas, because preserve the natural shoreline is what this is saying, right? These are talking about creating a beach and boat harbor. And the question was asked, don't these conflict with that? And that's why I jumped around, Kim, is that that's in section 4, but these goals are in section 3.
Okay.
I think if you look at the entire document, there's all sorts of times where principles kind of push against each other. And I think that's the reason why we have a council, is to kind of weigh things out and try to find a balance point. If these answers were simple, then we wouldn't need a deliberative body.
What you're saying makes sense because, Dave, because that's under natural resources, and this is under parks and recreation, arts and entertainment. And that's why the two conflict. They're under those two chapters, which
I think of Deer Creek, and it's very much recreational, but it's also for the outdoors. I mean, it's both. I don't know that that they collide that much. I don't know.
I'm wondering if the wording is simply, we would like a lot of protected beach around the lake, and we would like recreational amenities, and so trying to word that so one's not mutually exclusive of the other.
Well, in some ways, I think that the contradiction, the tension is easily reconcilable in the sense that you've got a general principle in 4.51 and a specific principle about a specific area in 3.5, and you basically, I think, are saying 4.5.1 applies everywhere that 3.5 doesn't.
which is what Kim was kind of saying about the Deer Creek.
And I think wording can be we can be thoughtful in the wording that suggests that we want both areas that are developed as well as areas that are protected. So there is going to be that tension, and where the balance point is great. We need to define what the balance point is here, just by articulating that there's two principles that we care about: natural open space as well as developed recreational uses, and then allow future councils and administrations to figure out what that balance point is between those two principles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm just thinking of the trail to Squaw Peak, I mean, you have to have access to be able to enjoy those places. And do you really want a trail? Well, you have to have a trail. You have to have some access to it. And does that destroy some of the natural? Yeah, it destroys the part where you're walking, but I think people get that part of it, that in order to enjoy it, you do have to have there is some impact. But I don't know that I think the wording doesn't bother me, I guess.
Okay. Very good. The question was asked, are these redundant with 3.6.1? Do we need these? Are they redundant enough that they could come out? Sorry, you're fine.
Maybe 3.6.4 and 3.6.2, just because you do address the senior population in 3.6.2.
Then one specific to the I guess.
Talks about needs and recreation facilities, doesn't include activities to
Really,
accommodate seniors.
6.4 is kind of an action step, not an objective. It's basically telling you how to do 6.2.
But I do think 362 and 363 are, I think they add to 3.61. So
Could you put up in 361 for decades to come for seniors, adaptive groups, and just be a little bit more specific in 3.61? Does that make sense? So if it read that facility stays safe, relevant, up to date for decades to come for all groups, including seniors, adaptive groups, and what else are we missing?
provide a diverse schedule of activities for all groups. Only 3.6.3. I'm okay with articulating them separately.
Yeah. The diverse schedule of groups too is also getting pretty specific.
Anyone have a problem with this one being moved to an action step? That does seem a little more like an action step than a goal or objective.
No, it's 361 is an objective, 362 is a goal, 363 is an objective. Is there a typo there? Are those?
Yeah, that should be an objective also.
So 362 should be an objective as well?
Yes.
Okay. Now, 363 is also seems to be a bit of an action step as well.
Let's give you specifics of how you.
And if we pull 363, 364, make them action steps, I could see combining 362 with 361 into a single objective.
Well, 6.4 just says to monitor, rather than meeting the needs of seniors, you're monitoring the needs of seniors and recommending programs and activities. Where 6.2 is meet the needs of seniors. So kind of say the same thing.
So 361.
provide fitness and recreational services for residents, but it could be all residents, including, or, for example, seniors. So you can call it out, make it more specific right there. There's a way to combine it.
Have we given enough input that you
Yeah.
feel like you can take another crack at it?
Yeah. Okay. This was, the red language is from the current general plan.
I feel like that's been achieved.
Let's check that box.
So you would pull that from 3.7 and move it up to 3.6?
No, we just delete it.
Because it's already, yeah.
So in the past, when we used to accomplish something and we moved it off of the schedule, we still kept it in a record of things that had been accomplished. Are we still looking to kind of do that?
Yes.
Does taking that off undermine the regional sports park?
Well, here's what's hard, is it's also specific, so if you go down to goal 3.7, adequately fund parks, entertainment, and recreation.
What does that mean?
I guess it depends on, the problem I have with objective 373 is develop a plan and financing for large recreational facilities for, what is in a large recreational facility?
I think that was written specifically for where we had the center, we had the Eldridge Center, we had all of these different things, and we accomplished.
So to me, an objective would be more like ensure that we are always providing adequate recreational facilities for our youth that outlives, you never check that one off.
Moving along, I recommend we just delete it.
Okay. 3.7, so is that make it too broadly worded, too nebulous?
Adequately fund parks, entertainment, and recreation.
Right.
I think the goal is the highest level.
Is that existing? I wonder if we have the word future in here. Adequate, existing and future parks, entertainment, and recreation. That way we could incorporate maybe a regional facility.
Makes it sound like we're not adequately funding.
Continue to.
I like to continue to work towards.
I would say we're not, because we have so many things on the plan that don't have funding identified. There's lots of parks designated, but we don't know when we'll build them or where.
Yeah, I think if you look at our 10-year outlook, we've got a pretty amazing funding plan.
I'm just thinking of.
To me, for instance, going after the RAP tax was a specific to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this was written in anticipation of hoping to get the route tax. This was written before that was done and was providing impetus for that.
But I think it should be, I mean, again, this is a vision, and my vision for Provo is that we adequately fund these services. And I think it should be articulated in our vision plan. Because in 8 years, we're going to be asking ourselves, do we want to we're going to ask our citizens, we're going to ask ourselves if we want to ask our citizens to renew that route tax.
How about continue to adequately fund?
Continue to adequately fund parks, entertainment, and recreation.
Get closer to.
It's an ongoing battle.
But it also implies that we've made, that we're doing it.
We're doing it now.
I'm trying to, yeah, I like that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Make that change. This is the current change that came in.
Deliver outcomes promised to Provo residents when approving the RAP tax.
Is that an action item?
Sounds like it.
That is, isn't it?
Do we list anywhere what those promises were?
No, we don't want anyone to remember.
I wouldn't want it in our vision document.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
It would be good to have those listed somewhere.
I wonder if, so we really didn't make promises, but we set expectations. I wonder if that's a better word to say,
Meeting expectations.
meet expectations.
Yeah.
Set for residents when approving the
Promise the expectations, right?
Yeah, we,
I think you need to wordsmith this a little bit.
Okay.
I think that, so his intent is, we want to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of our residents when they approve the RAP tax. So that's the intent.
The only counterpoint there is some people might be expecting a lot of even things that we didn't say that we were going to do. So I actually kind of like the under promise and over deliver. So if we're talking more about following up on what we said we were going to do rather than what they might be expecting, it just seems a little safer to me.
So when talking about residents, generally, I think it's kind of the collective expectations rather than just the extreme. So,
yeah.
This is a hard one because when I'm in a neighborhood and they refer back to a promise that was made decades ago, that was, I don't believe was ever a promise, you find yourself in a very difficult position.
you could go with something along the lines of, provide value to the residents in exchange for.
I like that. Spend the wise, something like use the dollars wisely and carefully and prudently and return value to our residents for the RAP tax dollars. Show return the value, something along those lines.
Or you could say, to accomplish the objectives in this chapter.
I think part of that too was when we talked about, placing signs along the river trail or along places where we have done improvements with RAP tax money, so people understand where their RAP tax money is going, and then that we are delivering sort of those expectations, the things that we talked about doing, we are doing, and I think that's important. Follow through with, and just letting them know kind of where, I think it's really important, especially if you want to renew this, to have those indications and those signs or those, some way that they know, they get clear that their RAP tax money is being used in the ways that they
demonstrate accountability to our residents for the RAP tax dollars. Something along those lines. Let's go give our accountability. And
that could be a second, either objective or second action step, whatever is more appropriate. Because I do think that the returning value, I think that's an important one, in addition to being accountable.
Transparent.
If that makes sense. I like your suggestion. I just don't want it to displace the other one of
I'll wordsmith this. I'll add something along the lines of what the mayor just suggested. I'll send that out.
Okay.
This next one was asked in relation to recent discussions that have been going on. Should this be kept?
I wasn't able to get any comments, and I have a number of comments on section 4, natural resources, are we gonna be able to go over to these that you have, or?
Do you want to go through this list and then we'll go through Mr.
Well,
Stewart's
we
list?
did
Or do you want to,
before.
do you want to talk about this one? Okay.
Go ahead and finish these, then we can go.
Is that one out of order, by the way?
They're all in.
Yeah, they're,
That was my whole.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they're all in different order, so these lists came in from different council members.
As well as the topic we pull from different sections.
Are you only going through these 2 pages then?
Yeah, this is the boiling down all the input I got. Save George. So that's all we're going through is these 2 pages and then what
Okay, fine.
George has got.
Okay.
So this next one.
It does seem a tad premature since we have a committee that's working on this right now. And that committee may be done before we need to finalize this, so we may be able to wait for that. I am okay with this as it's worded because of the word promote. I think that's a fairly safe word. If it was incentivize or another word, then, you know, I might have some problems, but if it's promote, I'm okay with it as written.
I actually had someone write to me and said, well, you were talking about words mean things, and promote means subsidize in my book. And I'm going, wow. So it means things to different people depending on their point of view, I guess.
Mr. Stewart?
I had added to it as they become practical and economically feasible, which if you look at objective 4.6, 4.61, 4.62, they all say practical and economically feasible. Why isn't that one also have that addition to it? If you look ahead of and below that, it says as they become practical and economically feasible. So I have a problem with the word promote also, but at the same time, if you add those caveats to it, then I would be much more.
You feel about replacing promote with explore.
Review, explore, anything like that.
Consider.
Yeah, I like those better.
Dave, we've gone too far for Dave.
Well, I like promote, but I have no problem with the caveats. I mean, you can never object to putting in clauses like as long as they're practical and economically feasible. So I don't know. To me, it's just a question of how much, and I don't think that this document is going to try to spell that out in detail.
Mr. Stewart?
Result, I'm against promote also. Can we vote on it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Can we vote to see how many are in favor of the word promote versus another word?
What's the other word?
Explore.
Explore.
I don't think there's words, explore is fine.
Can we, if we're just to be clear on what we're voting for, you know, I like promote in conjunction with the feasible, cost effective. I'm looking for exactly the words, but it'd be good just to have exactly define what we're voting on. Because
I would move that we strike the word promote in favor of explore private and public generation of renewable energy resources, i.e. so as they become practical and economically feasible.
Is there a second? Mr. Connect, any conversation on the motion?
That is what we're doing in committee. Well, let's see.
Isn't the committee debating whether they are practical and economically feasible? I guess the question is, once they are economically and practically feasible, why wouldn't you promote them?
Well, the thing is to explore private versus public. I mean, we're talking rooftop versus community solar. Really. At least that's how I look at this. When you explore the options, you'll see that there's pros and cons, and some are more feasible and financially viable than others.
The community solar is 5 cents and rooftop solar is 10 cents. So
No, I get that. I didn't view this, when I read it, I wasn't thinking it was talking about contrasting the two. I thought it was talking about promoting both as they
Well,
become.
But you explore it and then you know which you're supposed to promote. One
Right.
versus the other.
Yeah. I'm not arguing about promote or explore in isolation. My comment is about the caveat plus the explore, because it seems like they both do the same thing, that you're exploring to determine if they're economically feasible and practical, or once you've determined that, why wouldn't you promote them? But it's just a logical question in my mind about doing both at the same time. So.
Mr. Hardy?
I have a little objection to the as they become practical and economically feasible, because it suggests that they are not so now.
Aren't they being subsidized?
Would community solar be? So, and what about in a year? I mean, the nice thing about 461 is it's implement new advances. Is this when, doesn't that also imply that they're not at the moment?
Mr. Stoll?
Are you okay with leaving out the caveat if we use the word explore? Because I kind of agree with Mr. Jones there that it kind of.
if you look at all the other ones above, they say become practical and feasible. Objective 4.61, 4.64, excuse me, 4.72.
Mr. Strachan?
What about using the word consider and keep the caveat? So you consider them as they become feasible. And then you've got some flexibility about whether you ever want to implement them.
So consider private public generation of renewable energy sources as they become affordable.
So I'm gonna apologize, I even introduced explore. I know. I think what, if I'm gonna put some words in a couple of your mouths, but I don't think we've reached a decision from a policy perspective if we want to encourage things that are not currently financially practical. And until we do that, it's hard, I think we're gonna go round and round on this until we reach that conclusion. I think that's what some of these fine words are bordering on is, do we want to encourage somebody to go invest in solar panels because that's going to pave the way for others and lower the price eventually someday. I don't think we've reached that decision.
What's the time frame for, I mean, can we wait until February, whatever, on this, or do we need to have this set in stone before then?
I don't know that February, they're going to have some, hopefully solar figured out, but I don't think they're going to have the answer figured out.
That will change as technology changes. We may want to encourage it as technology changes. And so that.
Well, one could say as technology changes, you wouldn't have to encourage it, it would just happen.
Can we have consider as a placeholder for now? Can we say just to consider private and public generation of renewable energy resources and leave it at that for now as a placeholder until we decide?
Perhaps that's the alternative if we do make the vote.
Okay, oh, I guess we are going to vote. I'm sorry, I apologize. You have a motion on the table. So any further discussion on the motion?
Well, hold on, so do you like consider, George?
You like consider, explore, consider you one's fine with me. They do the same thing.
But considers what being offered right now.
But do both of them come with the ending, or are we just?
The motion included the ending.
The motion includes the ending.
So I guess, and my suggestion was without the ending, so it's just sort of a placeholder, consider private and public generation of renewable energy resources. I don't know if that's interesting.
Again, we're gonna go back to the other two objectives and take those out. Objective 4.61 says become practical and economic feasible. That's where I got the words. Objective 6.2, 4.6.2 says in a cost-effective manner.
Do both of those two also use words like consider or explore, or do they say to actually do something when those things happen?
4.6.1 says implement new advances in electrical energy delivery and control systems, i.e. smart grids, smart houses, as they become practical and economically feasible.
So how about Mr. Stewart adding, slightly changing the ending on all three of those to keeping an eye to practicality and feasibility? Keeping in mind, I think that what says to me is those things are important, but that sometimes we may keep that in mind and still do them. Not far enough? No.
So do you want to restate the motion so we can vote?
Yeah.
Could you restate my motion?
Sure. So, strike the word promote and say explore. So they're going to explore
Private and public.
private and public
Generation.
generation of renewable resources,
Energy resources.
As they are practical and fiscally,
Economically feasible.
feasible. You have that, it'll be right there.
As they are, is fine also. Amended motion. Change explore to consider. As they are,
Okay.
It's
So we have a substitute motion to change the wording to consider instead of explore.
I'll accept that. I'll change my motion to consider.
Okay. Any more discussion on the motion? And do you still second
Consider
that?
them then, if they're practical and economic? I'm not sure that I'm there yet, either on that, because I think there are that.
Consider means, consider doesn't make a decision. Consider means you consider.
I'm with you, so I don't know if I should make a substitute motion now or wait and we can vote on this, and then if it fails, then we vote on a different one, but.
Is it as or if they are economically and fiscally responsible?
As they become.
As they become, okay.
So if right now, if we consider them not economically feasible, do we not consider them?
Well, they don't necessarily promote them.
No, consider them. It says consider.
Well, you can always consider, you should keep considering it because you're looking to see if and when it becomes viable and feasible.
And I think that's the alternative that several of us are talking about. Just consider private and public generation of renewable energy resources. We should be considering them. And then at some point.
That's high enough that I think then we can implement some of those other things into that. That's right.
I'm comfortable with that. That's where I'd like to.
Let's just vote on this for a vote.
Is there a second on the amended motion for Mr. Stewart's amended motion? Mr. Connect? Thank you. Any more discussion on that?
Can you clarify what the motion on the table is?
The motion is to consider, to change the word explore to consider private and public generation of renewable energy sources as they become practical and economically feasible. So then everybody should vote on this then? Okay, thank you. Those in favor? And those opposed? Okay, so those in favor, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Van Buren, Mr. Connect, and Mr. Sewell, and those opposed, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Harding, and Mr. Winterton. So the motion carries. So we want to go to the next item, which is whether or not to keep 3.4.3, perform an independent cost benefit analysis to determine the efficacy of any change in site use with clear objectives and outcomes. study and develop a report on the environmental impacts of disturbing a former landfill site. Okay, so these were the golf course. This was actually my question. When we discussed the golf course to study and develop a report on the environmental impacts, it seems like the time to do that has come at different times, and we've never really recommended doing our own study. And so I wondered if they should be kept, if it's never been something that we've considered I don't know. And then an independent cost benefit analysis to determine the efficacy of change in the site use with their objectives and outcomes. Is this something that we're willing to do? Do we really want to do a study, an environmental impact study ourselves? And do we really want to do a cost benefit analysis ourselves? Is something, it's just a question I pose. Is it something that we would actually do?
That's a great question. Or we rely on somebody else to do it for us.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it being in there because I think right now it doesn't make sense, but perhaps something comes, situations change and having this in here would help us move forward if there ever comes a.
This seems to me not to be a Vision 2050 thing, more than maybe an action item. But the Vision 2050 would be more of a much higher level of what do we want to have happen in that area.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to strike both of them if you're not interested in doing that or haven't done it and don't have plans to do it. I would just suggest we strike it, but.
So as for the mayor, do we want to replace it with something higher level, addressing that same population?
Yeah, I think there is a goal that addresses the higher level.
Goal 3.4 already does.
What does it say, Kenny?
Examine East Bay Golf Course and operations benefit the community and compare with any potential commercial opportunities the land that it occupies.
You could argue that's even not high enough, but it certainly means you don't need this.
Motion.
Sure. Do you want to make one, or want me to make that motion just to strike those two objectives?
So 3.43
and 3.42 and 3.43.
Up until the last one, which seemed to have a little bit more disagreement, we've been doing most of this just by consensus. Before making the motion, maybe we just see if anyone objects, otherwise.
I'm good with that too. You're good with that? Everybody seems to be good. I'm seeing nods. Except for one. Are you okay with this? It looks like the majority are okay with it. So, do you have a concern or thought?
No, I'm okay with that one. I've just been stuck on the last vote for a second here, just carefully reviewing the wording. And if there's no objection, I'd like to change my vote on that last vote to a yes to a no on the wording of whatever it was.
On the solar question?
Yeah, on the wording.
Okay, so you voted for it?
Yeah.
And you want to vote against it?
And I believe, Mr. Jones, you said once if there's no objection, it's okay to.
Yeah, we looked that up in the rules and under Roberts that as long as it's during the same meeting, you can change your vote unless there's an objection. If there's an objection, then you'd have to make a motion to reconsider.
So it won't change the outcome, just the way it's recorded.
Does that change the outcome because you were the fourth? You would have the fourth vote on that one?
No, it would just go from 5-2 to 4-3.
No, it was 4-3 and it would go to 4-3 the other way. The other direction on the wording. Okay. So you had a substitute motion you wanted to make on that same item? Oh, actually, is there an objection to this first of all? Okay. So you're okay with generally? Okay, go ahead.
So if that's the case, I'd move that we, where are we at on that? on stage. Okay, thank you. I move that we reword objective 463 to consider private and public generation of renewable energy sources, i.e. wind, solar.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor? And those opposed? Okay, those in favor are Mr. Van Buren, Mr. Winterton, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Sewell, and Mr. Harding. And those opposed are Mr. Knapp and Mr. Stewart. So the motion carries. So we'll now go to objective 4.2.2, continue to support the Utah Lake Commission in accomplishing its goals. This was mine to ask that we add that align with the goals of Provo City. I don't know exactly what all their goals are, and so I just.
This one makes me think, and this won't resolve it for now, but we need to have the Utah Lake Commission come to a work meeting because it's probably been way too long, and we should be familiar with what they're doing there and what their objectives are. And I don't know if you want to do it in time for this, but we certainly could get those for everybody to consider. I think you'd find them very aligned. Provo City was very instrumental in forming that organization. It's a big thing for Mayor Billings. So it's also not a big deal to keep it in, but if you'd like, we can try to get you all that information on a timely basis too.
I think I was just thinking forward too. I mean, I don't know specifically all of them now, but moving forward as the commission changes, if their ideas change, I mean, it just makes sense to have them in alignment with what we would like to see happen as well. But just a sort of a safety and
Suggestion that might be where Bill wants to get would be just to change its to mutual. So continue to support the Utah Lake Commission in accomplishing mutual goals.
It sounds a little softer.
yeah, I'm good with that.
I'll make a note to get to a work session.
Okay. That's great. And then
With this from the existing general plan, there was an objection to the word required and an objection to the entire.
require clean business and industry. There was an objection to the entire thing. Okay. Mr. Sewell?
Could we substitute for require, encourage?
That was my, I didn't recommend necessarily getting rid of the whole thing, but I only have this. That's pretty.
Requires it to us, yeah.
I really encourage the word encourage in my.
Okay. Change that to encourage then. And then the last one, support the future development of Mountain Vista as a mixed-use facility for jobs and retail services. Will we prefer to place retail emphasis in other areas like Riverwoods should this be kept?
First of all, we ought to get rid of the word Ironton and stop referring it to it that way. And then secondly, it was the word retail that threw up the red flag.
I don't think the vision for Mountain Vista is retail.
And mixed use, of what kind of uses are we talking? When I think mixed use, I think of housing and retail.
This is also way too specific.
Yeah.
Maybe encourage, support Mount Vista as a source of economic development or jobs or something like that. Dixon, you wouldn't be offended if this totally went away with you.
No, because we're gonna keep working on it one way or
Yeah, and it's. Yeah,
No, this is important. It gives high value, but it's hard.
With this in there, if you were aligning with this, you're going to actually change your emphasis on Mount Vista if you're aligning with this.
It could potentially send a message that we're going a different direction.
Support the future development of Mountain Vista.
Period.
Yeah, period. Yeah.
I liked what the mayor said about economic development and jobs. I wish I could have captured exactly what you said there, but
Support the economic development of Mountain Vista. Or the encouragement.
Development of Provo.
Of Provo, yeah.
But support the completion of Mountain Vista as an ongoing strong economic development tool for, I don't know, how did I say that?
Jobs is part of it.
Yeah, it's jobs and tax base.
so can I move that Bill go back to
Yes.
the audio recording?
Yeah, because I didn't get
The essence is we want to capture that we support Mount Vista as a strong economic development tool for the city. Jobs.
Are there other areas in the city that are a focus, or, I mean, do we want to just focus on Mountain Vista, or are there other areas that we?
Are there other,
Is there
these are
saying
just
like-
excerpts that people had questions on, are there, trying to get to 6.8?
That's very specific. We're zoning in on one area in the city for economic development.
So goal 6.8 is develop business facilities and locations to encourage new business growth and job formation. 861, support Provo Town Mall. 682, support Mountain Vista. 683, support Riverwoods and East Bay. 6.4, promote business creation through small business incubator. So I'm comfortable with the way that we have very broad, and then the objectives are a little bit more specific, signaling our support for these areas.
All those you just read came from the general plan. Those are in the current general plan.
So how are we changing in that one? Then support the future development of Mountain Vista as a economic development tool.
And job growth, so some of them do jobs, but we'll get rid of the mixed use reference and the retail reference.
Okay.
Wordsmith it.
Okay. Go back.
Okay.
Future?
Yeah.
Yeah, support the development instead of future. Support the development.
I like completion. This was a word that was used as well. The completion of.
Okay.
Completing the development.
Yeah, that's all I had.
Okay, and then I had, I did have a couple of,
I had one that I thought I sent in on the airport about, at 643, they listed a bunch of cities, and I don't see a lot of those as hubs. And I'm interested in getting a hub where we can get to other places. I know that Denver is high on the list. We've already got LA, but I'm just looking for places that will get our residents to different areas. We have a list of cities that were Billings, Kansas City, Baltimore, Des Moines. You see where I'm at, 4643.
Mr. Richards looking at 4.4.3. I would like to see Denver, Los Angeles. It says 4.4.
Yeah.
You want 6.4?
It says 6.4.3, at least on 6.4, and then the
Your email's just got a typo, it's 4.4.3.
Oh, my email has got a, I'm sorry.
You're right, it's 6.4.3.
6.4.3. But we're just listing a bunch of cities, and I'd like to see.
So I think we gotta take all the cities out.
Yeah, I just go
refer to destinations.
key destinations or something.
Yeah, I don't know how you start listing cities.
I don't either.
And can we consider continuing to work with commercial airlines versus continuing to work with Legionnaire? Is that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Where are you, oh, you're right in that same one.
Yeah, same one, same one.
Okay.
So, not, I should have brought this up earlier, I'm just looking at my list again. And 4.6.3, the solar question, I had a note to include the goal to at the same time maintain the solvency of our power company. I don't know if that's explicit in those goals. You know, we're going to consider private and public generation of renewable energy resources, and at the same time maintain the solvency of our energy company. I think that's kind of the, yeah.
Or
but anyway,
consider the impact.
Or consider the impact.
Because
So,
I don't see that being a real threat to the power company.
well, but there are power companies that are turning from being more of a business, you know, model to maintenance model, and they're, so I think, you know, that's, I don't know. thought that was kind of important, but we don't need to go back there. And then the other one is in 4.0, it's not a goal, but I'd like it to be a goal, to maintain ownership of Rock Canyon and other canyons and access to our outdoor activities to ensure their protection. I like the idea of the city owning Rock Canyon. I like the idea of us owning the entrance to that park for lots of reasons. I feel like our city, we have a vested interest in maintaining that. And if that were to change hands with, federal land or whatever, I don't know that they would have the money or the same interest level that we have. So that would be the goal that I would like to have considered in 4. They had it with 4.2. Let me look back. When we talk about like the Provo River, we're talking about our natural amenities. It's a goal. It's a good.
Goal 4.1, work effectively as a city with other governmental agencies and provide organizations to protect and preserve, restore its natural resources. Is that the one, Kim?
Yeah, resource, there we go, 4.1, yeah.
4.1.
Surrounding mountains, canyons, foothills, wetlands, shorelines, riverbanks, and associated wildlife corridor. So maybe it's an objective under that to maintain the ownership of those canyons that we currently own.
We've had a lot of discussion with BLM about land swaps, and that's always been part of the equation. So that would be a pretty, I don't think we should go there casually if we eliminate that possibility.
I would have a problem with prohibiting any kind of land swaps, taking away some parts of the city, but it might depend on the city.
With BLM ownership of that land, would that provide you the comfort that it would be well cared for, or would that be concerning?
Well, I can be frank, yeah, it concerns me. I mean, we in our city balance our budget, the state balances its budget, the federal government, trillions of dollars in debt. I don't know what kind of money and funding they will have to manage land federally. So, being very frank. And so I just think that we have vested interest in that area, and it's the entryway to our canyons, and it's in our backyard, and it's a beautiful and amazing amenity. And so I do have concerns about swapping that out when you don't know how it will be cared for, and not say anything too negative that I haven't already said, but those are my concerns about being able to manage it financially and all those things. I don't
Even being explicit enough that even I was able to.
Anyway, that's my concern.
So you have a motion to add that?
I would like to add that as an objective to maintain ownership.
Well, let's see if there's a second, but I have a discussion on that. Motion on that.
I'm just second for discussion.
Okay, I'll second it for discussion, and then I will. I have concerns with that, and the fact that I don't know the ramifications. There's just, I'm not sure of the, if we say that's what it is. I would like to hear some, is there unintended consequences that are going to go along with that? I think it's a good idea right here, but I'm not sure what other things will be involved with that in the future. And I think that is something and I don't want to take lightly.
So it could be something that really benefits the city. Are we gonna have to go back and change these objectives? And there's something beneficial to the city that came up that we would be in favor of making exchanges for service.
We worked real hard to get to this ground in Provo Cities, man. I'm grateful for the efforts that were made there.
I was involved in that.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's an asset when we look at all our assets as we go forward.
I just hate to limit any kind of change. It might be better for the city to have a change.
Well, this is a vision, so.
Yeah, it's just a vision. I mean, does it really limit anything? The council can do.
It says if we're gonna own it, it could limit our vision.
If if it's in there, we're gonna take it off the table as an option.
I see value.
Mr. Sloan?
It seems like there would be the default would be that we would continue to own it. That would be, unless something came along that was really, really attractive for the city. In that case, like, again, I kind of worry about what we might be passing on. But it's just, I can't really envision what the scenario might be. So,
Mr. Harding?
Or do we consider maintaining ownership?
We're physically, economically
I'm okay, I think I want it in there, I just want that, and you know, a lot of people sacrificed to do that, to purchase, basically, that the mouth of that canyon, and I personally think it'd be good to have it in there as an objective. And I'd be okay with saying consider, you know, maintaining ownership of that, I think it's just good to have it in there. Seriously consider, thank you, I like that even better.
How about expressing a preference for city ownership?
I appreciate your concerns, and I mean, I think you eloquently stated them. I appreciate them. I don't know if I'm at the point at this moment that would support it. So if you're willing to go with something like the seriously consider or express preference, then I would be willing to support that.
I'd make that motion and seriously consider maintaining ownership of Rock Canyon. I don't know, the interest of the Rock Canyon trailhead.
Yeah, I think, may I suggest too, if you, we would probably rather, before you vote, that we meet with you in executive session about where we would seriously consider trading it. And at least what are the possibilities in today's world. And I can't speak to future opportunities, but you would immediately dampen some current possibilities that we haven't been, that are certainly not solidified, but that we've been pursuing, assuming that was an option. The Rock Canyon Alliance is very well aware of those, and they're not opposed to them. So I don't think we've been moving forward out of harmony with what the stakeholders felt is important.
Have they voted on that? I didn't.
No, but I've talked to Ginger about it.
So Ginger.
I just think the timing is right for that.
Is the time right to have a session scheduled?
If you'd like, sure.
Yeah, I think I'm aware, but it'd be good to have everybody be aware of what possibilities are. If you're not aware. Okay.
So that's a yes.
So, yeah, what's that?
Should we meet?
We can meet on that. That's fine. If there's not a, council is not wanting to move forward without meeting first, then I'll rescind I'll remove my motion. And then if you'd bring that to executive session.
Let's talk tomorrow in leadership about that.
Okay. And then, let's see. Okay, then Mr. Stewart, you had the list.
Yeah, go 4.4, I'd like to strike the words to meet or exceed all national and state standards for PM 2.5.
Wait.
And also the carbon dioxide.
Give him the reference.
4.4.
4.4.
We'd be leading improved air quality because clean air will improve the health of our residents. I don't know what it means to me to exceed all those. I'm not a scientist. I'm not familiar with all those regulations. I had to become more familiar with it before going to vote in favor of some things that I think I've opposed in the past. I'm not sure, so I don't know that we need to put those in. And they're gonna change, the national and state standards are gonna change. Could change with this new administration. So I think I'm certainly in favor of improving air quality because clean air will improve the health of our residents, including businesses, increase tourism, reduce dependence on fossil fuel. We want to be dependence on fossil fuel, and just to refer to national state standards is too broad for me.
Okay, which objective number are we looking at?
4.4.
Overall.
4.4.
Oh.
Are we required to meet state standards?
If we are, then we just become non-attainment, and then we have to develop a plan on how we're going to progress towards it.
And so if we're required to do it anyway, I don't see that.
We're not required to meet national standards.
Not state national, and I understand that, but if we'll let the state fight the battle, is what you're saying? Because we are required to meet the state standards, I think.
As a goal, I'll push back a little bit on this. As a goal, as a vision, not only I want our air quality to improve, I think it should be our goal, our vision at some point in the future where we will meet and exceed. And I think that's a great thing to shoot for. Whether we ever get there, but so I actually like the listing of the particular pollutants.
So 4.22, which is in red, talks about improving our air quality through better monitoring of automobile emissions, on and on and on. And then it says, and enforce standards not to exceed those set by the EPA. So on one hand, we're saying we should meet or exceed, and on the other hand, we said we should not exceed.
We won't enforce
I want to
standards.
take those out, but I want that out also, so.
And that's currently in our general plan. But the difference is here's our goal, and then we're saying, but we will not enforce standards that exceed the EPA.
Right, the enforcement can't go stricter than the law. George, if the law is the law, how do we get around that?
The law is currently being challenged in court. The EPA standards.
And then it would change, and then we're
So
still.
we've been a state, you could have changed those standards, so I just think, why hasn't it been?
To be clear, as the standards change, this adapts to it. This doesn't name a specific standard, it names keeping track with the standard. Did I say that right?
Yes. The standards for.
I wonder if I'd rather discuss the first one first and then go on to that one.
So Mr. Stewart's indicated it'd be good to break these into two separate discussions. So let's focus on the first one first, which is the goal, 4.4. As I look outside on winter days and see the haze and read about how on certain days of the year we have some of the worst air quality in the nation, I don't think we should lower our goal. I think having a goal to meet state and federal standards is not too high, and I don't see why you would want to shoot for anything less as a goal.
I would agree with that. I don't know if you're having heartburn over exceed, as in maybe there's no price tag too high. If we took out exceed, would that help?
And I have a problem with national. I think we should meet the state standards, which the state's gonna have to be whatever standards they're required to meet. So I'm bothered by exceed and I'm bothered by national.
I have a suggestion. Can we continue this to December 5th
Yes, ma'am.
and start the conversation right here with Mr. Stewart's? With this objective, this.
May I suggest along those lines that Bill put out all the changes from today?
Mhm.
Get George's from him and do what he's done up here, because that was so helpful when we could all see them.
Yeah, very helpful.
Combined with the changes we made today.
Yeah, the reason why I say that is we do have an item that we need to hear because it's gonna be on our evening meeting tonight. And so I'd like to, if we can get through the last two items in 10 minutes. It's gonna be ambitious, but I would like to get through. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Oh, now, will you also send us out with the next four? Is it the next group?
Yes.
So we'll deal with those. Cliff, will you help us get that reminder out to us so we can make sure we know which ones we're doing in?
Yeah.
4, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I'll work with Bill on that.
Okay.
7, 8, 10, and 11 will be the next group. 7, 8, 10, and 11.
Just a suggestion on that, since we didn't quite finish today, maybe this holdover plus 4 might be a lot to cover. Could we reduce that just a little bit as far as the number of chapters?
Are they big chapters or short chapters?
They're shorter ones.
Thank you. The next item of business is a discussion on updates to chapters 4.02 and 4.03 of the Provo City Code regarding the unclassified civil service. And this will be introduced by Dan Softly from Human Resources.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to get this updated. It's kind of a long time coming. Just kind of as a matter of introduction, I'm bringing this forward. We did a review of our state code recently on what actions could be Okay. Human Resources did a review recently of state code to see what actions could be appealed by employees. We wanted to make sure that we were consistent in our own policies as much as we could with the state code. And so we reviewed that and expanded that also to include a review of which positions in the city have appeal rights under the unclassified civil service process. And so the ordinance change that we have in front of you is a result of that. And what I'd like to do is just kind of go through the main sections of it. There's quite a bit of language change in there. A large part of that is procedural, but I just want to hit kind of the main points. If you look in, am I controlling this? In section 402.010, we're highlighting which positions are considered part of the unclassified civil service. The vast majority of these positions are already in the ordinance. We've made it a little bit easier to read, but we have added some based on what is allowed under state code. We've added clarification that the personal staff of the mayor who work in the main office of the mayor are not eligible for unclassified civil service protection. Our previous ordinance just said anyone in the mayor's office, but that's expanded since that was written to include customer service and some other sections, economic development. And so the intent of the ordinance is to make sure that we limit it to the personal staff of the mayor, the way the state codes reads, people in the elected office. And the other change that we're making is in light of that as well, is that we're adding council office employees as members of an elected office, that they are also not eligible for unclassified civil service protection. Any questions on those? Other than that, they're the same as they were before.
Who's personal staff, who's considered that mayor?
So that would be anyone in the main office. So that would be any of the clerical staff, any of the Corey's position, Whitney's position as the public relations position. So anyone who works in that main office.
Okay, there's historically been what's been known as the staff of the mayor, but when we brought customer service over, they did a direct report to me, they became known as the mayor's office. Dixon Holmes is a direct report now, but previously that was viewed as separate. Technically, it's in the mayor's office, so this isn't a good definition, could it change, but it because it could change, but it's in essence everybody that offices right over here.
Various persons have these been here, so they have agreed with the change.
Yeah, the intent is to not extend it to employees that would normally have civil service protection, like customer service representatives. Okay. If you go into what was formerly, or is section 2 of that same one, this one here, we're adding just one sentence to the end. We're just reaffirming that when you have a department head who is let go within 2 years, that they have a right to have a position in order to make them eligible for retirement. And we're not changing that. We're just saying that that holds true unless that removal is based on a violation law by the department head. We're trying to give the city extra protection so that if the department head actually breaks law or something, we're not stuck with the prospect of having to keep him or her on the city. So.
It's only 2 years before the retirement.
Yeah, for eligible for retirement, correct. Okay. Into section 3, this is just identifying who are department heads. This is in need of an update. We've had several.
Scroll that down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I can do it. If that makes it easier.
Yeah, right here. Okay. So in this section here, we're just identifying which positions are considered department heads. From the last time that we did this, we had some departments that have been absorbed into larger departments, such as human resources or information systems. And so we just wanted to clarify which ones are. Any questions on any of that? Okay. One of the main changes is in 403. And this is what spurred our putting this ordinance forward in the first place, is we are changing, under the old one, an employee could appeal any action resulting in a discharge or a suspension or a transfer to a position with less remuneration. The thing was on suspension, that meant any suspension at all, whether it was 1 day or 2 days. The way the state code reads is it allows that an appeal for any suspension that is longer than 2 days. That's very similar to what we do in the classified civil service, and we want it to be aligned with the state code on that issue. And so we've changed that so that it is a suspension has to be for more than 2 days without pay. And then the second part of that is just language straight from the state code that indicates, the city still has a right to initiate reductions in force or layoffs or reorganizations, and we can move our people around accordingly, and that's not eligible for an appeal. So, any questions on that particular section? Okay. Then we move into 403.015, which is an informal grievance procedure. The way the state code reads is it says when you're looking at the appeal process, before you go to a formal appeal, you have to exhaust your internal appeal process. And that was a little bit problematic for us because under the old way, it just said you have to have an informal discussion with your department head. And there was no timeframes on exactly when that had to be done. And so in order to build some timeframes around that so an employee would know I have X amount of days now to appeal this action formally, we built in this informal grievance procedure, and I won't go through all the details, but essentially it starts with your department head having a conversation with there's some timeframes built in when that has to happen. The next level of an appeal goes to the mayor's office for anyone who is actually in the classified civil service. And then once that's done, then you go to the formal appeal process. Okay.
One question?
Yeah.
So the unclassified, including this office here, the council office, right?
Well, they would not be part of the unclassified civil service. They are exempted out in that first section.
Right.
So that appeal, that informal appeal process does not apply to them.
Just clarifying that.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to 403.020, this is the actual formal appeal board. All we've really done here is just make some procedural changes as far as how to file that appeal. We did add some criteria. There's a section in here that says that there are certain things that are against the law. And we have recently updated our discrimination policy in the city. And so we've updated this language to be consistent with that, things that we would consider against the law as far as an action being taken against an employee. And that's in 3 there, just down on the bottom. We did add a couple of things that were in the state code for procedural as far as what, if an employee wins his appeal, what the state law requires him to receive. That includes back pay, et cetera. And then it also establishes the Court of Appeals if the employee or the city wishes to appeal the final action.
Sorry. Can I ask a question before she goes
You bet.
on 6?
Yeah.
Right, just a little bit. Sorry. The appeal, so, if it doesn't occur, if the meeting with the mayor doesn't occur within 7 days, or if there's a 3-day thing where someone needs to notify them within 3 business days of any action that's going to be taken, or if that doesn't happen, then they just, the deadline for the appeal process, I'm sorry. If it doesn't happen and the discussion is not held within 7 days or within 3 days of the hearing being held, then it's just considered denied.
Correct.
It seems odd that you can be denied by inaction. Does that make sense? I mean, shouldn't there be a definitive answer to your appeal or not? Or is it okay? I mean, it just seems odd that it can be answered by inaction. You just don't hear anything for 7 days or 3 days, and so you're been denied.
It's actually pretty standard from a legal perspective. It's certainly not a best practice as far as managing your employees. But for instance, with the state, with the Governmental Immunity Act, when someone files a claim with the city, if we don't respond in 60 days, it's deemed denied. And the reason why it works that way from a legal perspective is you can't appeal it unless it's over. So if you don't have a provision like that in there, you could prevent someone from ever appealing by just never responding to it.
Okay.
So it's typical to have a drop dead date. It is denied by inaction so that they have something to appeal.
Okay, maybe that should be spelled out somehow in there so that that's clear to the average person. I didn't see it that way at all. So I don't know.
When you get into the formal appeal process, you actually do have a very standard, they have to respond at the very end.
And our standard letters, disciplinary letters, contain a discussion in here notifying the employee of what their appeal rights are. And the other change you'll see is down here in the next section where it says within 10 calendar days of the final disposition. That's the intent of that sentence, is to say 10 days from either the day that you got notified or 10 days from the time that the deadline passed. That's when you have to file your formal appeal.
Okay. Moving on to 403030. This is dealing with who can be on the appeals board. This is essentially the same. We've just added some clarification language that there are certain employees that are not eligible to serve on that board. That's kind of in the practice, but it hasn't been in the code. So for example, employees from human resources and legal are not eligible to be on that appeal. That would be a direct conflict of interest since we're usually arguing the other side of that. And so it just sets up some rules of who can be on that. And then the last one that we have is actually in 404100. This is tied into our definitions of who are department heads. There is a provision in the code that says elected officials and appointed department directors, when they start, we waive the 1-year waiting period for them to have a matching 401k contribution. And there was some questions or not of which positions qualify for that. And so we wanted to clarify that the CAO position is also one that would be waived. And so we're adding it into this one. It hasn't come up because Wayne obviously was here at the time, so there was no waiting period for anyone hired before 2011. But in the future, we want to make sure that's clear. Any questions on that? I think that's it.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move on to the last item. Prepared to introduce the discussion on zone change request. Ready to share, request a zone change from A1 agriculture to residential R110 for approximately 4 acres of land located at 4 West, 3200 North, and Boulevard.
This, if you're not familiar with it, the University Avenue is there to the right. There's the bikeway and other areas which come between the property. The rezoning request we actually added in, so it goes through the center line of the road and includes this A15 property. The request is to go to R110. The neighborhood meeting was held, and the report back to us, it was a 22-0 vote in favor of the rezoning. There was one question brought up on this area here, which is part of Stonegate, why that's agricultural. We don't know. We're researching that. We think it's a map error because it should have been included in the rezoning of Stonegate. So.
And can you explain what the rationale for making the bike path and street R110?
It's just so we don't have zones. Zones usually go out to the center line of roads. So you don't have just gaps of zone land in the middle of nowhere. Just a cleanup sort of situation.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Maxwell?
I guess the only discussion that we had at the neighborhood meeting, if I remember right, was a concern had to do with the parking on the streets. We don't have parking on the streets, and in this area, is that correct? In this plan,
right? The homes would be here off of the elongated cul-de-sac, so there really isn't convenient parking to any outside streets. The narrow width of the road kind of prevents parking on the street just because it is only, I think, a 24-foot wide pavement or so through there. So they would be forced to park in the driveways through that area. And we would expect that they'd have their an HOA or CC&Rs to kind of handle that internally. Kind of the approach that way.
So that's a private road?
No, it's a city street. It's just built. Dave Graves can explain that maybe better behind you.
So if they do park on it, we can enforce?
Yes,
It's one of our local streets.
Other questions?
and I guess the other thing was, Dave, we didn't ever get the LDS Church owns it to the north, and there's no, they weren't willing to work at all with figuring anything further north.
They have, our understanding is they had no interest in, well, even anything with access.
It got updated. You should have gotten updated. It's just provided to back, but I can't see it updated.
All right, thank you. Mr. Parker, do you know of any administrative updates?
No.
Okay, and we are scheduled for a closed meeting?
I don't.
Yes.
I'm not aware. Are we? Dave, okay.
Okay. Okay, so, Mr. Jones, would you like to introduce that?
Yes, my understanding is that there is a proposed closed meeting topic regarding potential litigation and property acquisition, and that would be appropriate for a motion for closed meeting.
Okay, is there a motion on those lines? Thank you, Mr. Knapp. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. Those in favor? Voting is unanimous.
Council, apparently